Chair, this is Sabrina, and Wayne and Hudson are still working on the connection.
It says live.
Okay.
Chair Van Brockman, we are live.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the February 17th special meeting of the Oregon Transportation Commission. This is a special meeting, one of two we're going to be having related to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021, which was passed by the Congress and signed by the President in December of last year. We have already had one presentation at our regular meeting on January 20th last month, having this special meeting today. We will have another special meeting on February 10th and then close the comment record on March 25th and deliberate and make a decision on March 30th on the allocation of the flexible funding. As you know, Oregon is receiving over the next several years approximately $1.2 billion from this federal bill. That funding is separated into two categories, well, a number of categories, but about 2/3 of the money is directed money, or about $800 million, and the remaining 1/3 is discretionary, or about $400 million. We have had oral testimony and a lot of written testimony to date. We will have more oral testimony in a moment. Have a number of members of the legislature and local government officials here, elected officials and others to hear from. And at the conclusion of that testimony, we will take a very short break, and then have the commission will have an opportunity to have a discussion, an initial discussion on what we've heard to date. One other thing I want to mention, at the meeting on the 20th of January, there was a suggestion that we, with respect to the various initial options that we were taking comment on, or anything else people want to say, and we had some pie charts that people have been looking at, and there was a suggestion in January that we show those the discretionary pie in the context of the directed as well. So I've asked Assistant Director Brower to bring forward today for the commission to look at and consider and make comment on a mock-up of what it would look like to have both the discretionary and the directed. So we would see the discretionary in the context of the total amount available to us. So a number of you had mentioned, a number of those who testified in January mentioned wanting to see something that was kind of putting the discretionary in the context of the total amount we will receive. So we're going to look at a mock-up of something like that, during our discussion period. So with that, I think we're ready to go to public comments. And I'll ask that you please state your name, and at the beginning of your testimony, each person will have 2 minutes, which appreciate people staying on time on that. And I'll call 3 or 4 names at a time so people know the batting order here. So we'll be starting with Ben Schreiber, Senator Merkley, U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley's office, and then hear from Senator Spence, Representative Pham, and then Representative Dexter. So those will be the first four. And with that, please state your name for the record, Ben, and you'll have 2 minutes. Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much. My name is Ben Schreiber, and I'm Senator Merkley's Director of Climate and Energy based out of Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, Senator Merkley isn't able to join us here today, but I'm honored to provide a statement on his behalf. I appreciate the opportunity to provide input as you develop a plan to expand Oregon's electric vehicle charging infrastructure through the National Electric Vehicles Infrastructure Formula Program, NEVI. My thoughts are based on my experience driving my electric car, a Chevy Bolt, on multiple trips around the state. In so doing, I've had a firsthand opportunity to experience the state of our charging infrastructure. That charging infrastructure is currently woefully inadequate. Charging stations are often broken. Some have only level 2, 220 volt capability, which is too slow for extended trips. Some have a level 3 capability, but only serve one of the 2 common interfaces. Japanese brand cars like the Nissan Leaf use the CHAdeMO interface, while American brand cars like the Chevy Volt use the combined charging system, or the CCS interface. In addition, the pricing strategies differ greatly. Some charge 15 cents per kilowatt hour, only a little more than you would pay for electricity at your house. Others charge 45 cents per kilowatt hour, which seems like price gouging. Some have a fee for starting your charge, and others charge by the minute. Some require you to call a remote agent unless you have a club card for which you pay a monthly fee. And sometimes your calls go unanswered. In other cases, the agent is unable to remotely activate the charger. In short, while Mary and I have successfully navigated this chaotic structure, it's taken a lot of experimentation and patience. If we want electric cars to be widely adopted, a straightforward, hassle-free charging system is essential. Some may say, let the private market experiment and see what works best. To that I reply that we have the private experiment now. It's a mess, and we should apply the lessons so that the charging system built out through the NEVI formula program solves all the programs we have encountered. So here are my suggestions for a charging system that will make driving an electric car as convenient as driving with gasoline is now. All charging stations supported by the NEVI formula program grants must meet the following requirements. Speed. All charging stations must provide level 3 chargers for each car. Number of slots. All stations should have room for a minimum of at least 4 cars to park and simultaneously charge. With 4 slots, you'll have the chance to get a charge if one of the slots is occupied and another is out of order. Interoperability. The charger for each car slot must provide hookups for both the CHAdeMO and CCS system. Tesla has already built out a nationwide system of chargers. You should examine whether the charger should also have a Tesla system. Transparent pricing. All service should be based at a price per kilowatt hour. Having a system in which the different stations have widely varying payment systems based on time or initial hookup fee or club membership is an enormous frustration. A simple price per kilowatt hour is transparent, it cuts through the red tape. Fair pricing. Require a permit cap on the price that can be charged. My suggestion is that it needs not exceed twice the average rate people pay at their homes per kilowatt hour. Ease of use. Customers should be able to pay with a credit card at the station with no requirement to subscribe to a club or need to place a call to turn on the charger. The replacement of fossil-powered cars with electric cars is an essential part of a bold, fast transition to the renewable energy economy to address climate change. But smart deployment of charging infrastructure is essential to a fast transition. The NEVI One Formula program provides an opportunity to do the charging infrastructure right. Seize this opportunity by solving all the problems in our current chaotic system. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Sincerely, Senator Jeffrey A. Merkley.
Thank you very much, Ben. I
Thank you.
can tell you, as someone that drives an electric car myself, I know what he's talking about, and there's clearly a lot of work to be done. So, and we're invested in doing that and look forward to the support we will be getting from the good work that he and the other members of the delegation did in passing this measure. So thank you to him for his work in Washington to get this money out to Oregon.
Thank you all,
right.
and thanks for letting us speak, and we'll provide a written copy as well.
Thank you very much. Senator, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Van Brocklin, Vice Chair Simpson, and I went on mute somehow. I'll start over.
Okay, good.
Good afternoon, Chair Van Brocklin, Vice Chair Simpson, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is AKAsha Spencer, and I have the privilege of serving North and Southwest Portland and the city of Tigard as a state senator from District 18. This committee has an historic opportunity to invest in community-based transportation that is equitable, sustainable, provides for long-term economic growth and resiliency of Oregon's communities statewide through the IIJA. In my community and across other urban and suburban arterials, we need substantial infrastructure investment projects that range from building sidewalks and protected bike lanes, making our neighborhoods more accessible to community members at every stage of the life cycle, to repairing orphan highways like Southwest Hall and Barber Boulevard, expanding the routes and frequency of bus service, and gaining funding to support the Southwest Corridor Plan, which would expand TriMet light rail service from Portland to Tigard and Tualatin, reducing our dependency on single-person vehicle trips and hitting more of our state and local climate goals. Which is why, of the 4 proposed IIJA funding scenarios presented by ODOT, Scenario 2, public and active transportation, amended to provide for the reallocation of all dollars from the enhance, fix it, and maintenance categories in the sum of $158 million to local jurisdictions is critical. We all recognize the rarity of the size and nature of this investment and need to ensure that every dollar of these unrestricted funds is spent on investments we don't already have dedicated funding sources for. Which is why I urge your strong support of this community amended option, Scenario 2B, and I look forward to working alongside you to meet the demands of the moment while preparing for our resilient future. Thank you. I think that was under 2 minutes.
It was, and we appreciate it. Although I don't see a clock, maybe I'm the only one. So
I time myself all the time. Don't worry.
No, I wasn't referring to you. I just meant in general. I haven't seen we normally have a clock that comes up, and maybe it's the setting I'm on. I'm not seeing it. But anyway, we very much appreciate your being here. We appreciate your comments, and we appreciate your efficiency in expressing them. Thank you. Representative Pham, welcome. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Good afternoon, commissioners. Again, for the record, Con Pham, State Rep for Oregon House District 46. And I also serve as a member of the Joint Committee on Transportation in the state legislature. So I am testifying today to urge the OTC to vote for an IIJA spending scenario that makes meaningful strides towards achieving Oregon's transportation equity and climate goals. Responding to concerns about the proposed scenario 5, advocates created a scenario preserving the most equitable and climate just elements of ODOT's 4 scenarios. And the final result was scenario 2B, based on ODOT's public and active transportation scenario, with one important change. 2B calls for the reallocation of all the dollars from enhance, fix it, and maintenance categories, and directs this $158 million to local jurisdictions so they can focus community-specific transportation needs. For example, in my district, this money could go towards safety enhancements on orphan highways like the deadly Powell Boulevard or 82nd Avenue that have claimed far too many lives. The dollars could go towards installing sidewalks and speeding interventions so that students like my daughter can safely walk to school. Statewide, the funds could support enhanced public transit service in rural Oregon communities, where often rural residents must travel across geographically expansive counties to seek healthcare and legal services. All of these investments could be prioritized under Scenario 2B, and I urge your support. The constitutional restrictions on our Highway Trust Fund have meant that for decades, public transit and other non-highway modes have been neglected. In contrast, the projects currently listed within the Enhance, Fix It, and Maintenance categories are also all eligible for state highway funds. We need to be using every dollar of the rare, flexible, and unrestricted funding on things that we don't have dedicated funding sources for. Thank you for your time, and I very much look forward to working with all of you to make sure that our investments support Oregonians today and well into the future.
Thank you, Representative Pham. Appreciate your being here. Representative Dexter, are you here?
Thank you, Commissioner or Chair Robert Van Buckland, sorry. And to our commissioners. For the record, I'm Maxine Dexter, State Representative for House District 33, which includes Northwest Portland on the and Northeast Washington County. Sorry, we're about to vote, so I might have to, anyway.
Sure, sure, of course.
Sorry, I'm here today to call attention to the Oregon Transportation Council and ask you to allocate the IIJ funds as suggested by scenario 2B, where climate and equity priorities are centered and project funding is led by local needs and support and input, sorry. Our state has been clear at all governing levels on the need to center our policy making on equity and climate protection. In 2020, the governor issued Executive Order 20-04 with clear goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In 2021, the legislature passed House Bill 2021, which set clear goals for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in industries across Oregon. And in the Portland metro region, the Metro Council has centered their transportation policy decisions on their report or their posted values that include equity and climate leadership. The OTC has the opportunity to choose a project that meaningfully helps our state reach its target goals to reduce greenhouse gas pollution to at least 45% below 1990 emissions levels by 2035, and to at least 80% below 1990 emissions by 2050. Without investing in greener infrastructure, OTC will only inhibit the likelihood of Oregon reaching these targeted goals. Any projects approved by the OTC should be focused on these values and elevate the role of local leadership, empowering the people most impacted by the investments to decide where they will be most effectively used. The IIJA discretionary fund should be prioritized in areas where, due to constitutional constraints, the Highway Trust Fund cannot be used. I strongly support Scenario 2B's prioritization of funds for investment in public and active transportation that will support our shared goals of centering climate and equity while giving significant flexible funding to local jurisdictions. I have other comments that I wish that I could have shared with you, and I will be mindful of the time. Thank you so much for your attention to this matter. And I will just add that it would be very much appreciated if the legislative body, as well as other local leaders, could be involved prior to the final decision making on March 30th. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Representative Dexter. So we'll move on here. The next four names I have are Representative Hudson, Representative Bossard Davis, Representative Campos, and Clackamas County Chair Tootie Smith. So in that order, 2 minutes, and please state your name for the record at the beginning of your testimony. Thank you.
Hello. Chair Van Brocklin, members of the Oregon Transportation Commission. My name is Representative Zach Hudson. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I represent District 49, which comprises the cities of Troutdale, Fairview, Wood Village, and the northern part of Gresham. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this input from communities around Oregon. The $1.2 billion made available to us through the Investments, Infrastructure, and Jobs Act creates an amazing opportunity, but we must make sure that in spending these funds, we're prioritizing local needs, underserved communities, and the future of our air quality and climate. That's why I'm asking you to adopt Scenario 2B. I'm here to speak on behalf of my constituents. It's difficult to get around my district if you're unable to operate or afford a car. Some of my constituents can no longer safely operate a car and need to be able to count on trails, sidewalks, and public transit to get them to where they're going. There are also commuters who use TriMet's Blue Line Max that skirts the southern edge of my district. It's a reliable option for some, but it remains too infrequent and inaccessible for many of my constituents who work early mornings or late night shifts. Students in my district could more easily get to school, to after-school jobs, and to activities if they had frequent, reliable bus service along with safe routes to school. My district includes some major roads with very few crosswalks, creating difficulty and danger for pedestrians and drivers. Residents who do own cars are also upset about the conditions of local streets that have not been maintained, and they're tired of seeing the same potholes day after day. And of course, the climate crisis threatens everyone, and reducing the use of gasoline and diesel is important in addressing this. That's why I'm asking you to use the IIJA flexible funds to offer systemic solutions that address my constituents' needs and the needs of Oregonians across the state. Investments in local projects would allow communities to determine their own priorities based on the needs of their residents and would improve health, safety, and accessibility, especially for historically underserved communities. This investment is a unique opportunity, and we can't treat it as business as usual. Supporting the investments proposed in scenario 2B sets us on a better road to our future, a road with fewer potholes, great sidewalks, and reliable transit service. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hudson. Appreciate your being here. Okay, we'll move on to Representative Bossard Davis. Are you here?
Representative Davis is here. We just need her to accept her promotion and she should be good to go.
Okay, great.
Hi, I just got kicked off and back on. Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, I can hear you. Welcome.
Perfect,
Glad to
thank
have
you.
you here. If you'll state your name for the record, and then you have 2 minutes.
Perfect, thank you. My name is Shelly Bossard Davis. I'm the state representative from House District 15. Chair Van Brocklin, Vice Chair Simpson, members of the commission. As the Vice Chair of the Joint Transportation Committee, I've been advocating for the IIJA funding to be used to meet critical infrastructure needs that maintain existing deteriorating assets, ensure congestion relief and freight mobility, and provide safe transportation for all Oregonians. Note you were all provided a letter signed by the bipartisan chairs and co-chairs and vice chairs of the Oregon Legislature's Joint Committee on Transportation. House Bill 2017 passed in 2017, marking a historic investment in Oregon's transportation system. I was not serving in the legislature when that passed, but I am reminded every day by my colleagues who were involved of how that bill was developed and of the promises that were made. It was not crafted overnight. It was developed and passed after a lengthy conversation with Oregonians. House Bill 2017 was the product of collaboration, compromise, and trust. However, we have fallen short on fully delivering projects promised within House Bill 2017. In doing so, we are failing on our promises and squandering the trust that Oregonians have put in us. Taxes were raised, promises were made. Oregonians don't care that opponents to these projects continue with their threats. They care that not a single shovel of dirt has turned over on one of the worst bottlenecks in the nation at the I-5 Rose Quarter. The additional dollars promised to us through the federal IIJA offer a once-in-a-generation opportunity that will allow us to fill some of the gaps that are still existing. We need to spend these dollars where they will benefit the most Oregonians, not just the loudest ones. Thank you for your time, and I plan to remain engaged throughout this process. I stand ready to help as you move these projects forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Davis. Appreciate your coming, and we certainly will read the letter from the Joint Committee.
Thank you.
Chair Smith, welcome. Whoops, to your, yep. Voila.
Yep, we all do that. Thank you, Chair Van Brocklin and members of the commission. I provided testimony at your last meeting, so I will be brief in my comments today. We still acknowledge the gas tax is not enough to provide all the transportation needs of the state. We also understand the legislature directed ODOT to pursue tolling on the I-5 and I-205 corridors. What we don't understand is why ODOT has developed a plan to implement tolling on I-205 before obtaining federal approval to congestion price the rest of the region. The tolling feasibility group clearly directed ODOT to implement toll projects at the Rose Quarter and the I-205 simultaneously. Why has ODOT proceeded with an approach that only tolls 205 ahead of the rest of the region? I have heard that maybe last time there may be some confusion about what I said, but I'd like to be clear today. We are not asking for $750 million to pay for the entire I-205 capital project. We are not asking for $350 million to pay for the phase 1A of the capital project. We are asking for you to use the financing tools provided in HB 3055, together with a portion of the new federal BIL IIJA dollars to develop a finance plan to advance phase 1 of the I-205 capital improvements project so that it can maintain the current construction timeline. Excuse me. ODOT's current proposal could create a scenario where a 7-mile straight stretch of I-205 is tolled in perpetuity while the rest of the region never sees tolling. There is no evidence of a plan to integrate the I-205 toll project into the broader regional mobility pricing program, and there are very low odds that the RMPP will get federal approval without regional support. We stand united with our regional partners in asking for your help to direct ODOT staff to work with us and take the time to get this right so we can realize our shared vision of a transportation system that is safe, equitable, and balanced. Thank you kindly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really appreciate your being here and the clarifications, and look forward to more conversation. All right. So with that, we will move on to our next group. Metro Councilor Mary Nolan, followed by Metro Councilor Juan Gonzalez, followed by Wilsonville Mayor Julie Fitzgerald, followed by Bend Mayor Sally Russell. So 2 minutes per person. Please state your name at the beginning of your testimony. Wait a minute. I have a chat. A lot of chat here. Let me just see. Oh, Representative Campos is here. So we'll hear from him first. Sorry. That was my fault. So Representative Campos, and then I'll review again the four that I just mentioned. So Representative Campos. And
thank you so much.
Sorry, Representative Martinez as well. So why don't we hear from those two first, and first Representative Campos, then Representative Martinez.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, my name is Whitney Campos. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a state representative for House District 28, which covers Beaverton and Aloha and sits on the traditional lands of the Atpalati, Cowlitz, Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and Kalapuya peoples. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify and all the work you've already completed along the allocation process. Like others have mentioned today, I do not believe that the currently proposed scenarios will achieve our state's equity and climate objectives. And in fact, I fear that some may even exacerbate worsening conditions. As the youngest woman in history elected to the Oregon State Legislature, it is likely that I will see in my lifetime the climate outcomes from the funding scenario you select on March 30th. I also represent a district that is highly invested in transportation infrastructure as a place that lacks a lot of the walkability that we'd like to see more of across the state, which is why I support the community generated scenario 2B. I believe that the IIJA flexible funds should be looked at as an opportunity to confirm the OTC's commitment to creating a transportation future that prioritizes multimodal travel options, honors our environment, and preserves Oregon's beauty for generations to come. The era of freeway expansion must end, and we must collectively work towards providing Oregonians with safer, greener, and more human-scaled ways of getting to where they need to go. I believe that we're capable of achieving this. We just need to be brave enough to say no to the status quo. I recognize that this is a team effort, and I'm excited for legislators and the OTC to continue strengthening our relationship so that we can ensure Oregonians get the transportation future they deserve. I encourage you to adopt scenario 2B, support heightened investment in local transportation needs, and use these flexible funds to ensure Oregonians are provided a transportation system that meets the diverse needs of today and into the future. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Appreciate your being here, and we enjoyed hearing your comments. Representative Martinez, are you here? And I'm going through the chat messages to try and make sure I'm not missing anyone. So I'm assembling a list off of the chat. So everyone be patient and we'll get through everyone. Okay, with that, Representative Martinez. Are you here? Okay. I'll keep you on the list and go to the next four as I was describing. So Councilor Nolan, then Councilor Gonzalez, then Mayor Fitzgerald, then Mayor Russell.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'm Mary Nolan, Metro Counselor for District 5, which includes the project areas along I-5 for the Rose Quarter and Columbia River Crossing IBR projects. On behalf of a constituency that both depends heavily on transit and has been and continues to be devalued in transportation decisions, I ask that you adopt scenario 2B for deployment of the IIJA discretionary funds. It's simply too frequently that transportation planners and engineers and highway operators hide behind restrictions in the Oregon Constitution and some recently added to Oregon statute about how gas tax revenues can be deployed as justification for not investing in transit operations and pedestrian and bike safety initiatives. So here is the moment we all have, and you on the commission particularly have, to act proactively. If the practice under ODOT to shortchange transit and pedestrian and bike capital and operations has truly been for lack of authority and not lack of interest or lack of will, scenario 2B is your opportunity to deliver. Bluntly, we should not use federal discretionary funds to pay for infrastructure or operations that are eligible under the Highway Trust Fund restrictions. Under scenario 2B, ODOT can partner with local transportation authorities to invest substantially in shovel-ready projects that turn us toward a transportation system that syncs with our collective climate, safety, and equity values. I stand behind an approach that utilizes these discretionary funds for the dual benefits of a truly 21st century pivot in our transportation investments and an economic shot in the arm for local construction workforce and transportation-based businesses. Thanks for your interest. Thanks for your tough decisions. I look forward to working with your team and Metro's team to seize this compelling opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nolan. Appreciate your being here and look forward to the conversations you suggest. Okay, we'll move on to Councilor Gonzalez, followed by Mayor Fitzgerald and Mayor Russell. And then we have several other elected officials after them, so please.
Great. Well, thank you, Chair, Van Brocklen, and OTC Commissioners. For the record, my name is Juan Carlos Gonzalez. I represent North and Western Washington County on the Metro Council. I also serve on JPAC and have the opportunity to work with regional leaders at our regional transportation table to address many of the key issues impacting our region. And I'm here to provide testimony to share that I believe that the IIJA dollars provide an incredible opportunity for ODOT and for Oregon to make significant progress in our state's climate goals and to bring critical resources to underinvested urban arterials, all while centering racial justice and the opportunity for people to achieve prosperity. I've mentioned to you in past testimonies that I grew up on TV Highway. TV Highway is a 19-mile corridor that bisects 4 cities and countless neighborhoods and communities in unincorporated Washington County. TV Highway shares a common story to many state-owned arterials in Oregon. We've seen rapid urbanization drastically change the use of the corridor and how communities interact with it. In Cornelius, TV Highway is the main street that elders use to cross the street to get to church at San Alejandro. When I was 5 years old, living in an apartment off of Murray Boulevard and TV Highway, I would walk with my tia to get to the Kmart across the street, which is now being redeveloped. And even in high school, when I was growing up in Cornelius, would walk the TV Highway in the residential streets to get to the bus stop and would just see folks crossing the street in different areas. And the important part of these stories are to share that my story is like many others that call this area home. And a story of sharing how TV Highway has outlived its designation. My appeal to you today is to take a look at doing things differently. Let's be transformational with these dollars, not transactional. It would be a loss for Oregon for us to use these funds in business as usual. Let's use these to address urban arterials comprehensively with transit and safety improvements and think outside the box for the future of our region. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the categories we're definitely exploring is involves the exact kind of project. In fact, that specific highway. And of course, what we've been able to do on 82nd is another example of what we're trying to focus on. I would say overall, and this is something every single person who's going to speak today knows, we have a long list of needs and not as long a list of sources. So we do have, as Councilor Nolan mentioned, a lot of difficult choices given the substantial list of needs and the less substantial list of sources to fund those needs. All right, so we'll now move on. So thank you very much for your testimony, Councilor Gonzalez. Move on to Mayor Fitzgerald, followed by Mayor Russell, and then we'll hear from Mayor Hill.
Thank you, Chair Van Brocklin and members of the Oregon Transportation Commission. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm Julie Fitzgerald, and I serve as mayor of the city of Wilsonville, which operates a public transit agency called South Metro Area Regional Transit, or SMART. I have submitted written testimony in advance, and I would like to highlight 3 issues for your consideration today. First, we recommend that the OTC immediately start with federal infrastructure investment funds to advance 2 major projects of statewide significance: the I-205 Abernathy Bridge project and the I-5 Boone Bridge improvement and seismic retrofit project. Both of these projects have considerable political support from local area jurisdictions. Each project is designed to reduce traffic congestion and accidents in major bottleneck zones that severely impact commuter and freight movement. And both critically important projects provide the state with seismically resilient bridges over the Willamette River, able to survive the projected 9.0 Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. And second, in relation to the I-205 project, we request that ODOT not toll I-205 in advance of completing the regional mobility pricing project. Rather, we request that ODOT conduct a coordinated approach to tolling and congestion pricing with both projects simultaneously. And third, we request that the OTC provide an explicit commitment that the impacts of tolling, especially traffic diversion, will be mitigated to protect the health of our communities and the economic viability of our region before implementing the I-205 toll project. To advance this commitment, we request that ODOT continue planning efforts with public transit agencies and establish a process in conjunction with the impacted local governments to identify and prioritize for state toll revenue investments in specific traffic diversion mitigation projects. We appreciate your work to improve traffic congestion and make it healthier and safer for all Oregonians to take care of their business and have high quality lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Fitzgerald, very much. Mayor Russell.
Thank you. Greetings, Chair Van Brocklin and Vice Chair Simpson and Transportation Commissioners. It's really an honor to have the opportunity to address you today. I'm Sally Russell, the Mayor of Bend. I'm here to request funds to complete a project within our community that we have been working for many years now. You have the ability to fund the final gap. Our $50 million ask stands on the back of landmark projects in the past 3 years, including the creation of the core area tax increment financing district right in the heart of Bend along Old Highway 97, and also the biggest transportation bond in the history of our community. This ask today meets your goals and Bend's too. Equity, housing, economic development, increasing bike and pedestrian facilities, addressing climate change, and public safety are some of them. The Midtown Crossings project focuses on 2 outdated and undersized undercrossings and one proposed bike and pedestrian overcrossing. This project recognizes the importance of connecting figuratively and literally our community over both a major railroad and also the 4-lane Highway 97 that bisects our town from north to south. In the polling for our transportation bond, we learned that east-west connectivity is one of the very highest values in our community around transportation. And while recognizing east-west travel in Bend faces significant barriers for all modes of travel, this is particularly true for pedestrians and cyclists. So why $15 million from the Oregon Transportation Commission? Because there are no clear additional funding sources for the dollars needed to move forward and complete this suite of projects. We have worked hard and secured close to 20 million to complete improvements. And you have a letter that outlines this that you've already received from the City of Bend. So to conclude, today we in Bend are calling on you, the Oregon Transportation Commission, to match our local commitments and cover the remaining gap. Our number is firm. We have worked hard to amass the 20 million, but that still leaves us short of the full solutions our entire community agrees that we need today. We look forward to your partnership in addressing this highly prized and prioritized community project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor Russell. Appreciate your participating today, and certainly give your request thoughtful consideration. The next four on my list are Mayor Hill from McMinnville, followed by Commissioner Motorist from Polk County, Commissioner Fay, apologies, from Washington County, and Commissioner Jayapal from Multnomah County. And then the fifth in that list is Commissioner Bush or Buck from Lane County. So county commissioners. Commissioner Motorist, you're first. Please state your name, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Van Brockman and Commission. I am Polk County Commissioner Motorist. I'm here today as a board member of both the Mid-Willamette Act and the Salem-Keizer MPO, also known as SCATS. Both MWAC and SCATS sent separate letters to the OTC in January with our reviews on how Oregon should use the IIJ funds. In addition, the MPOs from Salem-Keizer, Metro, and Eugene Springfield areas are submitting a joint letter to the OTC addressing the scenarios introduced to your January 20th meeting. Our three MPOs are speaking with a single voice to emphasize these common priorities. Increase funding to ODOT's ARCH program to address and prevent hazardous situations on arterials and ODOT highways within our MPOs that have experienced increased crashes, injuries, deaths on our streets. Increased funding for alternative transportation options in our cities. Most importantly, allow non-ODOT owned arterials to be eligible for the proposed Great Streets Competitive Grant Program. Our MPOs support the proposed funding for local climate planning. This is crucial for developing the plans and projects for reducing carbon emissions to meet state mandated emission reduction targets. I ask Safety and Fix-It lead the way by addressing our bottlenecks. This reduces congestion, enhances pedestrian bicycle use, and reduces our carbon footprint by eliminating idling traffic. More importantly, it allows our first responders to do their jobs to their utmost capabilities. As everyone who's testified before me from Willamette Valley, we've stated the importance of the Aurora Donald interchange on I-5. I-5 we know is the lifeblood to the northwest. On a local level, I'd like to address Highway 22 and 51, which will be coming to you in the near future. This intersection has been in the top 5% of the SPIS report for over the last 10 years, with over 67,000 cars traveling through it daily and growing. It serves as one of the key connections for Polk County, Yamhill, and Lincoln counties for freight, shipping our industrial, timber, and agricultural products. Highway 22 is one of the main connections to our largest tourist attractions also for the state, which is the Oregon Coast and the Spirit Mountain Casino. I thank you so much for this opportunity. I look forward to addressing you more in the future.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I skipped Mayor Hill from McMinnville, and so I want to hear from him next. And then and then the others that I mentioned, Phi, Jayapal, and Buck to follow. So apologies, Mayor Hill, and welcome. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Van Brockman and the members of the Oregon Transportation Committee. My name is Scott Hill, and I'm the mayor of McMinnville, Oregon. I also today am representing the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments as I sit on the MWAC board, and I'm a part of the Yamhill County Bypass Committee. I want to thank you for your efforts that are of the commission of prioritizing and directing the new federal funding that has come through the IIGA funding that represents this monumental opportunity for Oregon to meet some of its largest infrastructure needs and goals. I urge you to use the funding to advance projects that have the greatest benefit for regional and state economic development. The Newburgh-Dundee bypass continues to be a high priority transportation project in our area, which includes regions that span from metro to the coast and has great economic impact on the entire state. We know that we've had the support of legislature in completing phase 1, and we've received additional funding through the mayor's discretionary funds that has us shovel ready, and we're starting on phase 2A. We need to complete the bypass project. You know, in rural projects of the magnitude that we're looking at, they can only be built with the help of the legislature and the executive transportation leaders, and seizing every opportunity to help us in rural Oregon. I would advocate for the enhanced option, which gives the ability for our local acts to weigh in on the needed projects within their area. The McMinnville or the Newburgh-Dundee bypass goes hand in hand with the Aurora-Donald project to make that a safe corridor for travel. I'll tell you, we see so much impact as it comes from tourism in McMinnville, Spirit Mountain, and the coast. So again, thank you for listening to the input that we would have within our area, and thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, Commissioner Phi or Fay, and I apologize. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong.
Hi, Chair. I think if you ask my brother, still say Fay, and if you ask me, I say Phi. So you're correct either way today.
Okay, well, you're here and he's not, so I'm going with Phi.
Thank you for having me. For the record, my name is Nafisa Phi, and I'm a Washington County Commissioner for District 1, which is Aloha, Beaverton, Cooper Mountain, and Reedville areas of Washington County. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you. We have a unique opportunity with the $412 million in flex funds from the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act to prioritize projects and programs with better climate and equity impacts, like safe routes to school, great streets, and local climate planning. I am here today to express my support for an investment approach that supports communities that have been overshadowed and underfunded. Scenario 2B calls for the reallocations of all for enhance, fix it, and maintenance dollars. It also directs this money, $158 million, to local jurisdictions so they can focus on community-specific transportation needs. For example, in my district, this money could go towards safety enhancements on orphan highways like Farmington Road and TV Highway. We need to build a transportation system that increases safe and convenient transportation options for our community members. When investments are made equitably, they seek to ensure that individuals and families in all communities can participate in and benefit from the economic growth and activity throughout the region. I urge you today to adopt an investment approach that aligns with the climate-friendly and equitable communities rule, understanding that roughly 40% of Oregon GHG emissions come from the transportation sector. Any fix-it funding should prioritize projects with the biggest climate and equity impact. The discretionary IIJA funds present a timely and necessary opportunity for Oregon I believe that our focus on public and active transportation infrastructure and not heavily prioritizing highway enhancement will lead to healthier communities, protecting our climate, and broaden access to opportunities for our residents. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to continuing to work to modernize our transportation system.
Thank you very much. All right. Multnomah County Commissioner Jayapal.
Good afternoon, Chair Van Brocklin, Vice Chair Simpson, and members of the Commission. Thank you for having me today. For the record, I'm Sushila Jayapal, Multnomah County Commissioner for District 2, which consists of North, Northeast, and parts of East Portland. I'm speaking today to urge the Commission to invest the IIJA Flexible Highway Program funds using a community-driven approach that prioritizes racial justice and smart climate choices, and that recognizes the vital role local governments play in maintaining our roads and bridges, reducing traffic fatalities and injuries, and addressing climate change. Funding scenario 2B, submitted by Transportation and Environmental Justice community-based organizations, meets these criteria. My district contains some of the most diverse neighborhoods in the state, with significant numbers of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as immigrants and refugees. These constituents of mine often lack access to vehicles and rely more heavily on walking and public transportation to get to schools, work, and play. And these are the communities who bear the brunt of climate change, of our underinvestment in public and active transportation, and of underfunded local transportation and maintenance budgets. These IIJA flexible funds offer a unique opportunity to do things differently, to invest in equitable, climate-forward, locally driven priorities that will benefit all our communities. They offer the opportunity to prioritize programs with proven climate and equity impacts, like Safe Routes to School and Great Streets, programs that we cannot fund with Highway Trust Fund revenues. And they offer the opportunity to provide equitable funding to the local governments that manage and maintain the majority of bridges and road miles in the state. Sitting at the intersection of public health and transportation, we have a unique ability to address the needs of our constituents. And this package has enough funding to positively impact the lives of all. The overlap of our state and local transportation infrastructure requires us to invest in both simultaneously. Investing solely in state infrastructure would result in inequitable improvements, which is counter to the goals our state has set for itself around equity and resiliency. I urge you to seize this opportunity and thank you for all the work you do to secure our transportation future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that too. So, although it sounds like it should be easy to pronounce. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Heather.
Excellent. Yes, it is Buck. Thank you.
All right. Sorry for the other variations.
Oh, that's okay. I get it all the time. Well, again, thank you, Chair Van Brocklin and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Lane County Commissioner Heather Buck. I represent East Lane County, a largely rural district, and I'm chair of the National Association of Counties Highway Safety Subcommittee of their Transportation Steering Committee. I want to thank you for your extensive effort to hear from stakeholders on the IIJA throughout the region. I've submitted testimony, written testimony, but for the record, I just want to emphasize two particular points. The first point is that Lane County's road fund is not what it used to be. We appreciate that the legislature had acted to index the state fuel tax, but each year the budget committee just struggles with how to ensure our road fund is strategic. Like most places, our ability to invest in road projects beyond preservation is extremely limited, and we barely keep pace with our maintenance needs. The IIJA investment represents a unique opportunity to invest in some much needed capital improvements, particularly for our bridges, many of which are functionally obsolete and several of which are structurally deficient. The IIJA has built-in incentives for you to bring direct bridge formula funding programs to off-system bridge projects, and I urge you to strongly consider that unique opportunity. The second point is that I'm committed to improving our safety levels across all of our users on our roadways. Our board adopted the first ever traffic safety action plan 5 years ago, largely in response to our unfortunate standing in 2015 of having more roadway related fatalities of any county. In addition to our safety plan, we're in the midst of adopting our first ever bicycle master plan. And I want to emphasize to the committee that shoulder widening is key to both plans, but shoulder widening is not recognized as bicycle infrastructure in available state active transportation grant funding. I hope that you can provide input to that change limitation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate you being with us. Okay, we will move on to Port of Hood River Commissioner Fox, followed by Chair Peralta with the Mid-Willamette Council of Governments, and then Brian Worley, and then Kevin Greenwood. So Commissioner Fox.
Thank you and good afternoon. I am Mike Fox, Commissioner at the Port of Hood River. I'm here testifying today on behalf of both the Port of Hood River and the Bi-State Working Group to request that the Oregon Transportation Commission direct $20 million of the Oregon Federal IIJA funding to the completion of the design and engineering work for the Hood River Bridge project. The bridge that connects Hood River to White Salmon is incredibly important to our local community and to the gorge region as a whole, but it is also functionally obsolete, weight restricted, seismically deficient, and a hazard for maritime freight on the Columbia River. Repair costs of the existing bridge continues to grow year over year. Replacing the Hood River Bridge is vital to the safety of the surrounding communities in both Oregon and Washington, and the project has been the #1 economic development priority for the Mid-Columbia region for many years. The project has received $15 million in funding to begin engineering, but an additional $20 million of funding is needed to complete the design and the engineering work for the project. There's a plan in place now to have our new bridge open for business by October 2030. To do that, we have to have design and engineering work completed by about 2026 in order for construction to begin in 2027. Any delays or stoppages of design and engineering work due to lack of available funds will increase project costs and require additional spending to repair and maintain the existing bridge. What we're talking about here is that, as you all know, we're entering a period of inflation and escalation, and our bridge is estimated to be about $500 million. There's allowances in there for inflation, but only at 4%. So if we delay the project by any period of time, costs are going to go up. As you consider allocation of the IIJA resources, please consider the unique position of this project, its magnitude, and costs are out of reach for most local programming dollars, and the project is not eligible for highway trust funds because it's not owned by the state. We hope that the OTC will consider allocating a portion of the 15% of the IIJA funding dedicated to off-system bridges to our project. It's in our region's highest priority. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, Chair Peralta.
Good afternoon, Chair Van Brocklin and members of the Commission. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Sal Peralta. I'm a city councilor from McMinnville and chair of the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. Thank you for your public service, and thanks for the opportunity to testify on Oregon's flexible funds portion of the IIJA. I understand you're weighing in on 4 main scenarios for discretionary funding, and as chair of Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments, I support the frameworks provided by our partners in SCATS, MWACT, and Metro. Our hope is that your final scenario will emphasize highway enhancement projects and increase funding for active and safety transportation projects that gives the kind of local flexibility of funds outlined by advocates of scenario 2B, but suggests that the highway transportation projects retain a stronger secondary priority than recommended in that proposal in a manner consistent with the recommendations of SCATS, MWACT, and Metro. I understand there's a lot of hands out with legitimate claims for these funds. Our council supports that enhanced funds be used to help complete the Newburgh-Dundee bypass and the Junction Valley interchange between Fort Hill and the Spirit Mountain Casino. However, I'd also like to call this Commission's special attention to the Aurora Donald interchange at I-5 in North Marion County. This has rapidly become a major arterial corridor for much of the heavy equipment and commuter traffic from our region to Portland and is in desperate, urgent, immediate need for completion. I strongly suggest that you provide funds for the construction of phase 2 before beginning major new projects. SCATS and MWACT are also asking you to consider increasing funding active transportation improvement projects, especially those that provide enhanced services traditionally underserved and poor BIPOC communities, and that allow cities and counties to compete for enhanced funds along the lines of Proposal 2B. These priorities align with large portions of our region that are not part of larger metro areas, including most of Yamhill and Polk counties. I've included a transportation plan developed by the city of McMinnville for Oregon's Highway 99W that is a great example of the kinds of bike and pedestrian safety upgrades that would be good candidates for these kinds of funds. That particular corridor serves one of the poorest and most diverse census tracts in Oregon, with 27% of residents being Latino and Latinx, and also serves the city's downtown core, economic district, and several major employers. Using enhanced funds for those kinds of projects helps to foster the kinds of state and local partnerships that reflect the highest and best use for these types of funds. Thanks for your consideration, and thank you for your public service.
Thank you. And thank you for your public service. Mr. Worley, followed by Mr. Greenwood, followed by Katie Brooks. Please state your name, and you have 2 minutes, Mr. Worley.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair Van Brocklin, members of the Oregon Transportation Commission. For the record, my name is Brian Worley, Association of Oregon Counties Road Program Director. Thank you for allowing me to speak today on behalf of Oregon's 36 county governments, the Oregon Association of County Engineers and Surveyors, County Public Works and Road Departments. With over 32,000 road miles under county jurisdiction, counties manage, own, and maintain the largest portion of Oregon's shared transportation system, approximately 41%, including approximately 3,400 bridges on the National Bridge Inventory. But I don't need to remind the OTC commissioners of the importance and partnership of the county transportation system and why the new $1.2 billion in Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act is critical to local governments. We appreciate ODOT's initial scenario proposals and goal to support local governments, especially significant new bridge funding. Many federal programs are important to local governments, and I've submitted written testimony, but as you consider funding proposals, I will highlight just a few of the most significant program investments today. Oregon counties support providing additional direct funding to local governments within the $412 million ODOT Flexible Highway Program funds to meet local communities. But in addition, counties also support ODOT adequately funding the state system of good repair that balances the full transportation system needs and is most cost effective. ODOT faces a significant long-term deficit in the agency's state highway fund operations and maintenance budget. The significant influx of federal funding through IIJA will exacerbate this operations and maintenance shortfall by increasing the amount of state funding ODOT needs to shift, provide a match for federal funds, and by increasing staff costs for delivering federally funded projects. Counties support the commission to take a balanced approach, allocating adequate IIJA funds to cover the cost of some operations and maintenance programs currently funded by state dollars to offset this impact, especially additional pressure to future cuts to very critical local programs like the State Fund Exchange Program that is already inadequately resourced. Counties support allocating adequate funding within the new $268 million bridge formula program and $32 million in new local bridge program. 65% of Oregon's county bridges are in fair or poor condition as of 2020 and increased by 79% over the last 2 decades. I'll point you to the new 15% set aside and 100% federal funding of off-system bridges. I implore you to take advantage of this new funding opportunity to maximize this off-system need that counties currently have. And then just finally, I'll mention the PROTECT program, resiliency program. Counties own and maintain large systems. And I think although Congress did not allocate local funding to this program, I would implore you to look at the costs. There's huge cost savings. There's a study that was provided by ODOT and jointly by counties a few years ago that showed that detour routes off the state system are approximately 10% of the cost of the ODOT system. So this is a cost-effective way to bring our local governments up to resilient standards as we face more natural disasters in the future. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to working with all of you on these funding decisions.
Thank you. Mr. Greenwood? Kevin Greenwood?
Can you see me?
I see you.
All right, great. Thank you, Chair Van Brocklen and members of the commission. My name is Kevin Greenwood, and I am the Bridge Replacement Administrator for the Port of Hood River. I would like to advocate for an increase in the local bridge program funding. A recent fully programmed preliminary cost estimate for the Hood River Bridge identified a cost of $500 million for the replacement of the Hood River White Salmon Bridge. This bridge is in the middle of a 75-mile stretch of the Columbia River between I-197 and I-205, and having an unrestricted access point between Hood River and Klickitat counties is critical for our timber, fruit processors, and aggregate truckers that have used this bridge for generations to move product between the states. Having only $34 million dedicated to local bridges, and considering that the port is looking for $20 million for engineering for the Hood River Bridge project, would just about eat up the entire amount. It's unique that our bridge is a DOT-sized project, $500 million, but included in the local bridge pot. Again, thank you for considering an increase in local bridge program funding for a project the size of the Hood River Bridge. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood. The next three will be Katie Brooks, Corey Harlan, Aaron Brown. Katie Brooks.
Great. Good afternoon,
I see you before us.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today, Chair Van Brocklen and Vice Chair Simpson and the rest of the commissioners. Greatly appreciate the decisions that you're making and all these projects that are so vital to our economy and our communities. I'm here as the CEO of the Bend Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here to support the City of Bend's ask for $15 million for the overcrossings and undercrossings of Highway 97 and the BNSF Railway. This project is something that has been actually funded in large part locally. I co-chaired the PAC that passed the largest transportation bond in the history of Bend. So we've already gotten about half of the money secured for these projects. And what they will do that matches with the IIJA funds is really hit on all the things that I believe the federal monies are designated to do. For example, it will catalyze development and the redevelopment of areas of town that are designated to provide thousands of living units, which we desperately, desperately need in Bend. And will provide connectivity with transit, multimodal, and things that are not cars that get you across that parkway and the railway that's really divided East and West Bend for years and years and years. So it's quite literally a connection between socioeconomic areas and just geographic areas of our community. And it'll also incite hundreds of millions of private investment in that area called the Central District. In addition to that, you can imagine it is not safe to try and cross over the Parkway and also the BNSF Railway. The two undercrossings we have now are far below safety standards of what I know I'd want my kids to go on. And in addition to that, a new overcrossing at Hawthorne would be built as well that really connects the downtown area that goes all the way out to our community college, to our OSU Cascades campus, to the downtown core, and connects that with the east side of our community. So we believe this will have a safe, very highly connected, sustainable connection between our community with equitable access and something that we would really like to see happen in our community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And thank you for participating in our meeting. We appreciate your testimony. I'm learning new things every second. Okay. Corey Harlan and then Aaron Brooks, pardon me, Aaron Brown. I just heard from Katie Brooks. Corey Harlan, Aaron Brown, and then Mike Tody to follow.
Good afternoon, Chair Van Brockland, Vice Chair Simpson, and OTC Commissioners. For the record, I'm Corey Harlan. I'm the Cities and Towns Program Manager with Central Oregon Land Watch here in Bend. For over 36 years, we've advocated for the region's sustainable growth by creating complete communities within city limits and minimizing sprawl on our wild places and farmlands. Thank you for seeking public comment on how best to allocate flexible federal funds available to Oregon via the IIJA, and the substantial time and energy you are all committing to this process. Land Watch and the hundreds of Central Oregonians and community members we represent want to see these resources allocated in ways that best catalyze and support Oregon's local communities and becoming more equitable, safe, and climate-friendly places. Therefore, we urge you to prioritize this funding in 3 important and impactful ways. We've also provided more detailed written testimony on each of these that you'll find in your meeting materials. First, please move forward with a spending scenario similar to what has been described as scenario 2B in the comments today. One that more explicitly prioritizes active and public transportation and better meets local needs for people who walk, bike, roll, and take transit, as well as climate and equity considerations. Second, continue to include at least $15 million for local climate planning in the spending scenario that moves forward to help local jurisdictions implement the state's climate-friendly and equitable rulemaking with a primary focus on updates of transportation system plans and planning and designating climate-friendly areas. And third, as you've heard already today, there is deep, broad community support in Central Oregon for prioritizing $15 million in funding for Bend's Midtown pedestrian and bicycle crossings. You'll see in your meeting materials, there are over 100 local businesses, service providers, institutions, organizations, community leaders, and individuals who support these projects that are central to connecting accessible, safe, and essential multimodal connections in the heart of Bend and catalyzing equitable redevelopment and more affordable housing choices in Bend Central District and core area. By directing funds in these 3 critical and transformative ways, OTC's leadership will help ensure that Oregon's communities are more equitable, safe, and climate-friendly places for all, for generations to come. Thank you for your consideration of these comments.
Thank you. Aaron Brown, followed by Mike Tody, followed by Tim Gresseth.
Good afternoon. Can folks hear me?
We can hear you. Welcome, Aaron.
Fantastic. It's great to see some faces. Chair Van Brockland, members of the OTC, my name is Aaron Brown, and I'm testifying on behalf of No More Freeways, here to add my voice to support scenario 2B that the community has put together. We're nearing the 2-year anniversary of the original coronavirus outbreak, and I've been thinking a lot about what I wish I could tell the version of myself in February 2020. Obviously, we want to go back and say, go spend time with our elderly and immunocompromised relatives, go enjoy live music, go spill beer on each other at a dive bar watching a Blazers game. But imagine if you could go back in time and speak not just to yourselves, but to say influential members of Oregon's public health commissions. While we figure out key details of the virus, just how profoundly little we knew about it in those 8 weeks. It was really stressful. Armed with all of the knowledge that we have now about how the virus spreads, about the vaccines, importance of masks, imagine how much harm we could minimize by passing that information back. I'm testifying you today to suggest that February 22, 2022 is essentially the March 2020 of climate change. The heat waves that killed over 100 people, the wildfires that decimated entire Southern Oregon towns, the floods in Eastern Oregon, the droughts. We are just starting with all of the ways we are experiencing the repercussions of inaction and acquiescence to fossil fuels. And to be clear, just like the average American couldn't stop COVID in February 2020 just by washing their hands and needed government actions to buy masks and coordinate lockdowns, we need government action now to promote the systemic change to rapidly decarbonize our communities. You don't have to go back in time to speak to influential Oregon commissions that have the opportunity to take bold positions and avert catastrophic future suffering. Chair Van Brockland and members of the OTC, you simply need to look in the mirror. The OTC can push for the reduction of VMT and investing in an abundance of irresistible transit and transportation options. You can be the heroes that say they saw what was coming and made immediate action to prepare for the storms ahead. There are numerous legislators here today to telling you it's not too late to make the bold decisions that will undoubtedly improve the long-term well-being and resilience of the state. So I encourage you to ask, If you do not have the authority to stand up to the legislature and demand that the OTC invest in this, I know that many of you have expressed frustration that and I know my time's up, but let me just finish this point. I know many of you have expressed frustration that you feel bound to House Bill 2017. If you aren't able to ask and move in a different direction, why does the OTC exist in the first place? This is the sort of existential threat where it's time to break the glass, and I encourage you to support scenario 2B. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay, Mr. Tody, followed by Mr. Gressiff, followed by Mr. Lawrence. And then we'll be getting down to the final 10 or so.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair Van Brockland, members of the commission. My name is Mike Tody. I'm the Conservation Director with the Oregon Hunters Association. Oregon Hunters Association have been working with ODOT on a number of wildlife crossing projects and plans across our state. I'm here today to ask for your support for this important work to continue on. We have previously shared the benefits to both motorists and wildlife with this type of implementation and development of safe wildlife crossing on Oregon's highways. As we know, funding is always the challenge. Here is an opportunity to support further work with safe wildlife crossings by committing a small portion of the flexible highway program funds that are now available. To demonstrate the importance and priority of this type of work, your own spending priority survey recently completed highlighted how fish and wildlife should be a priority in this process. Also, I'd also like to point out that in our current legislative session, House Bill 4130 is on the floor, has been passed out of committee, and that, if successful, would appoint or appropriate $7 million of general fund, just once again illustrating how Oregonians see this type of work as a priority. With that, I'd like to conclude my comments and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. It looks like the chair dropped off the call. Vice Chair, would you like to take the lead on the rest of the list, or would you like me to keep going?
I don't know the list unless it's all clarified in the chat, but the chat seems kind of scattered. So if you want to take the lead on essentially kind of going in the next prioritized order, that'd be best.
Will do. Next on the list, we are missing Tim Grisa. We're going to move on to Rhett Lawrence.
I don't know what happened there, but I'm back on. So
okay.
Bobby's back.
Okay.
So Tim is not here, I think I heard you say, so we'll move on to Mr.
Correct.
Lawrence, then Mr. Dolganis, and then Kyle or Keel Johnson. So Ms. Rhett Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair Van Brockland, members of the commission. Good afternoon. My name is Rhett Lawrence. I'm the Pacific Northwest Policy Manager at Fourth. We're a nonprofit organization working to electrify transportation in all sectors. Founded in 2011, our trade organization now has over 175 members representing the full spectrum of transportation electrification stakeholders, including charging providers, electric utilities, vehicle manufacturers, public and nonprofit organizations, and more. I did submit some more detailed written comments for the record, but appreciate the opportunity today to provide some quick thoughts on how Oregon can best utilize these IIJ dollars to facilitate our state's transition to zero emission vehicles. Specifically, we believe this federal funding presents a tremendous opportunity for Oregon to accelerate the equitable expansion of our electric vehicle charging network that we know will be necessary to meet our future transportation infrastructure needs. You all are no doubt aware of the findings of ODOT's TINA analysis from last year, which Fourth had the privilege of collaborating on. That study left no doubt as to the magnitude of the challenge ahead of us to accomplish the massive build out of transportation electrification infrastructure that will be necessary to keep pace with Oregon's expected rate of electric vehicle adoption over the next 15 years. As you know, Oregon's allocation of IIJ funding includes $52 million that federal guidance requires be spent on the fast EV charging along key corridors, as well as additional charging funds the state and cities can compete for. Bill also includes an additional $82 million to reduce carbon emissions from on-road vehicles and substantial other funding to electrify school buses, transit fleets, and more. As detailed in our written comments, we have recommended some guiding principles for investing these funds in EV infrastructure, including leveraging additional local, state, and private investments to maximize flexibility, centering equity and focusing on the needs of historically underserved communities, and ensuring long-term viability, reliability, and interoperability of charging stations. I see my time is running out quickly. I think the piece I wanted to emphasize the most was we're appreciative of the $52 million that's allocated for the corridor fast charging. What we would like to advocate for is that ODOT and the OTC look at the $82 million in carbon reduction funds and use some of that money to actively seek incentives or competitive grants to build out the other key infrastructure charging needs of our state to accomplish the goals of TINA. So with that, I'll leave it there, and thank you for the time to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. I appreciate your being here. Mr. Dolganas.
Hi there. This is Dick Dolganas down in Roseburg, and Chair Van Brockland, members of the commission rather. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about the IIJA funds. My emphasis is really on using these to make some serious change in the way we've built our communities and our transportation system. I think there's a lot of catch up we need to do on what used to be called alternative modes. And what we don't want to see is to keep reinforcing the unsustainable system we have. You've heard a lot, I'm sure, about everything from, as you just heard, electric cars. We know about injuries and deaths from car crashes. We know there are freight needs. We know there are people who can't or shouldn't be driving, like my 98-year-old neighbor, for example. We know that our current system really is unfair to people who don't have income. It takes so much money to buy and operate a car. We know we're dealing with climate change. We know that active transportation actually benefits our community and our people. So what I'm saying is that the streets and the roads and the parking lots and the single occupancy vehicles and the congestion really isn't our future, I hope. It doesn't address those issues that I just mentioned. We need to deal with some serious change. My suggestion is change your approach. Don't look at this as building roads. Look at it as building communities. Unleash those employees at ODOT to do something that's right for the state. Build a healthy, safe, equitable, climate-friendly state. I think you can do it. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dolganas. So you're from I think it's Mr. Johnson, then Kathy Tuttle, then James Paulson.
Hello, my name is Kyle Johnson, and I'm the owner and founder of Go by Bike. We operate the largest bike valet in all of North America at the bottom of the aerial tram. And I just wanted to share with you some of my experience. I think that we talk a lot about active transportation and promoting bicycling and different mode shares. But in the United States, we just don't have that many examples of that funding really sort of changing the mode share. But we do have a really great example here in Portland in South Waterfront with OHSU and the aerial tram, where we can see how investing our money in something besides automobile infrastructure has really changed how people get around. And so on April 1st, we're going to be celebrating our 10-year anniversary, and we'll have parked over 500,000 bicycles in those 10 years. And before COVID, we would park about 450 people every single day. And we have this multimodal intersection right at the bottom of the aerial tram, where we have streetcar, bikes, and an aerial tram, transit, and cars, and they all come together. And it's a really great example of when we invest in things besides enhancing freeways, that it's possible to create this change and create a low carbon transportation system that's equitable and that creates a lot of return for the people that are using it. So I hope that you consider not funding enhanced freeways and use this opportunity to really change how people and funding for transportation happens in Oregon. So thank you very much. And thank you for your service of being on this committee.
Thank you. Kathy Tuttle and then James Paulson.
Thank you, Chairman Van Brocklin and members of the commission. My name is Kathy Tuttle, and I've worked as an academic and city planner in Seattle for the last 30 years. I recently moved to Portland to pursue new projects, and I'm here today representing the board of Bike Loud PDX. I'm here to talk to you about your legacy and how the actions you take now as mature leaders will impact lives for generations. I'm here to speak for my 2 adult professional children who have never had a driver's license and never will, likely. They are among the 40% of all people who simply do not drive. These are people who do not drive out of choice, because of disabilities, because they cannot afford to drive, or because of age. And that's right, 40% of all people do not drive. As leaders on this commission, you have been given an awesome responsibility of choosing how to distribute IIJA funds and choosing how to invest in Oregon communities and its future transportation. You have the opportunity to ensure the governor's executive order is followed, that all agencies significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I respectfully submit my testimony to ask you to strongly consider scenario 2B that includes transit, freight, safe routes to school, great streets, bicycle and walk options. You have the power to choose to use these valuable, flexible, once-in-a-generation funds as a legacy that you will provide to my adult children and so many others in Oregon who will never drive, and for the earth and for a livable future. Thank you so much again for your service.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tuttle. Appreciate your comments. Mr. Paulson.
Hello, my name is James Paulson, and I'm here supporting Frog Ferry. I'm the board chair of Frog Ferry. I really appreciate your opportunity to present to you guys today. After hearing all the testimony today, I'm really energized by the words that people are saying and the projects that people are bringing. And I think that I support all of the projects and information that people have presented today. But today I want to talk about a great opportunity, and that's bringing ferry system to the Portland metro area. And what we've done in pulling together this program is we started with the community first and built it from there. So we're building a program that's really based around how can we benefit the community. And so at the heart of it, you have the St. John's Cathedral Park neighborhood, which has not seen the level of transportation infrastructure investments that other areas of the region have. And so we thought we'd start there for the people who've been heavily affected by this, and we'd build the system out from there, all the way up to Vancouver, all the way downtown, and then further south, all the way to Oregon City. And what we feel is bringing a ferry system along and using our waterways doesn't require the use of building any more structural infrastructure as far as roads and rails. It also gives us the opportunity to move from where we are now with more efficient diesel engine to more electrified engines. What we're really looking at is how can we move our workforce up and down this corridor. This corridor, as we start now, when we look into the future, is going to be the most dynamic space where jobs are going to be growing, jobs that we don't even see today. We need to give people access to those jobs that are going to be created along our river. And especially those people who've been marginalized from these types of jobs, we need to give them access to these jobs. And investing in a Frog Ferry system, would be an investment in a new mode of transportation that's not available to us today and is much in need today and into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Sorry, appreciate your thoughts. And we're all familiar with the Frog Ferry. And so-
Should drivers with no DUI-
Whoops. Sorry. So appreciate your thoughtful comments, and they'll enhance what we've already learned about the Frog Ferry. So appreciate it. So we will move on now to Zach Schwartz, Peter Wilcox, and then Mary Pavetto. Zach?
Thank you, Chair Van Brocklin and members of the commission. Thank you for the opportunity to provide public comments on the use of IIJ funds. For the record, my name is Zach Schwartz, representing Wildlands Network, an organization specializing in restoring and protecting wildlife's ability to move across connected landscapes. I'm here to reiterate the request that the commission consider directing a portion of the flexible funds of at least $10 million towards wildlife crossing infrastructure for Oregon roadways. Since the last IIJ webinar, legislation has been introduced and passed unanimously out of the House Interim Committee on Environment and Natural Resources that would allocate $7 million to wildlife crossing infrastructure. This bill has also received broad public support in both urban and rural areas, with media outlets across the state publishing articles and op-eds in support of the bill. While the robust support for the legislation is exciting and encouraging, $7 million is not sufficient to implement Oregon's crossing infrastructure needs. A recently released report from the Oregon Action Team on Ungulate Migration presents a list of 10 priority wildlife crossings across the state. The funding needed to make these 10 projects complete or shovel-ready is between $22 and $36 million. $10 million from the flexible funds and the $7 million allocated by legislation could be used to leverage new federal funds made available through the Wildlife Crossing Pilot Program to make this priority list a reality. There have been over 30,000 recorded wildlife collisions in the past 5 years in Oregon, costing Oregonians tens of millions of dollars, not to mention the injuries and fatalities that can result from the collisions. Wildlife crossings are a proven means of making roadways safer for both drivers and wildlife, reducing collisions by over 85%, yet Oregon lags behind many states in building them. Oregonians across the state strongly support increased funding for their implementation, and I ask that you please consider allocating $10 million, a small portion of the $1.2 billion of IIJA funds towards wildlife crossings. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much, Zach. Mr. Wilcox, Mary Pavetto, and then the final three are Tom Kelly, Sarah Mays, and Megan Ramey.
Greetings, Chair Van Brocklin, commissioners and ODOT staff. My name is Captain Peter Wilcox, and I'm the volunteer green tech leader for Frog Ferry and the founding director of the Inside Passage Decarbonization Project, which works to decarbonize and detoxify the Inside Passage marine ecosystem. Nonprofit Frog Ferry's diverse, hopeful commuting and business supporters and professional volunteers like myself have worked tirelessly for 5 years to develop an affordable green passenger ferry service finely tailored for the metro area's already publicly owned navigable rivers and docks. With just $6 million of the IIJA's funds flexible dollars, Frog Ferry will upgrade 2 of those docks, build and starting in 2023, operate a 70-passenger pilot ferry project for 2 years, providing a unique and much quicker transit option between Cathedral Park and downtown for 1,000 or more lucky people a day. After gaining design insights from its pilot, Frog Ferry plans to scale up to a 7-vessel fully electric fleet once the necessary charging infrastructure is completed. The pilot service alone forgoes around 3,000 metric tons of CO2 per year while reducing car and freight congestion on I-5's north-northeast stretch. Beyond that, it will bring a new and highly green attraction, workers and shoppers to a downtown craving all of these things, and a vital transportation resiliency lifeline by creating the first and only public transit and emergency response service in the region that would not be completely disabled in a major seismic event. Furthermore, as Representative Pham has noted, Frog Ferry funding will help balance the remarkable fact that all of your current flexible fund scenarios actually expand fossil fuel infrastructure. I ask you, aren't these crucial benefits worth just a little over 0.1% of the over 400 million in flexible funds you are allocating? Thousands of your neighbors, particularly young people and those that have to ride transit, are watching to see how you will answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. All right, Ms. Pavetto, followed by Tom Kelly, Sarah Mays, and Megan Ramey.
Chair, Ms. Pavetto is not with us.
Okay, thank you, Sabrina. So we will move on to Tom, then Sarah, then Megan. Tom?
Hello, Chair Brocklin, Commissioners, and ODOT staff. My name's Tom Kelly. I'm the president of Neil Kelly, a remodeling firm in Oregon that's been in business for 75 years. I'm also the founding chair of the Oregon Business for Climate, and we advocate for a clean and just transportation network. I'm here today to advocate for a new green mode of transportation, the Frog Ferry. Our values are steeped in social and environmental accountability, and we ask you to consider both as you decide where and how to invest the federal funds that you are assessing and assigning to policy areas and projects. As you are well aware, 40% of greenhouse gas emissions are caused by transportation. And your leadership team is responsible for providing safe and maintained roads and highways. But you also have an opportunity to invest in a new mode of transit to get cars off the roadways to help with traffic congestion, free up roadways for freight mobility, and to address bottlenecks. This funding is not fortifying the status quo. It is giving us the opportunity to be more competitive, innovative, resilient, and healthier. Frog Ferry is a nonprofit that has convened a team of experts to cost effectively and quickly stand up a ferry service with the goal of being fully electrified. The infrastructure bill puts a focus on active transportation, EV charging, increased safety, modernization, climate equity, and pilot projects. We ask that you find funding of $6 million for our ferry pilot project to put one vessel on the Willamette River from Cathedral Park to River Place. And finally, I just want to mention that there's a new poll that just came out that found that residents of Cathedral Park, 77% are in favor of this project and utilizing this transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Sarah Mays. Am I pronouncing that right or wrong?
Maisie. Hello, my
Maisie.
name is Sarah Maisie.
Thank you. Sorry.
No problem. Chair Van Brocklin and members of the Oregon Transportation Commission. Again, my name is Sarah Maisie, and thank you so much for the opportunity to comment on the priorities for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding. I work in Eugene as a Safe Routes to School coordinator, and I would like to share my perspective from that position. In my school district alone, we have a prioritized list of more than 200 infrastructure needs that, if implemented, would make it safer for students to walk, bike, skate, scoot, use a mobility device to either get to school or to their bus stop to travel to and from school. And when I learn of these infrastructure needs, it's generally from school staff and families who are feeling panicked and desperate because they literally fear for the lives of their children on their trip to school. Many of these problems could be solved with a fraction of the funds that it takes to touch a highway. Meanwhile, there are some problems that are larger and vitally important, and there is no source of funding to accomplish with them. For example, half of the students at our highest need traditional high school are cut off from access to their school by a highway, meaning that they need to travel on what has been designated by the city as a high crash corridor through multiple high crash intersections to get to school. So it turns out that not many families feel comfortable letting their children walk or bike on that route. I don't even use that route, walking or biking. The bike rack at that high school typically has about 20 something bikes in the rack. And that's in contrast to our other high schools where you might see close to 100 or 150, maybe even close to 200 bikes in the rack. And again, this is our highest need traditional high school. I'm incredibly grateful that this infusion of funds exists, and I appreciate the focus on safe routes to school, active transportation, and transit. I'm pleased to see that safe routes to school education programming is included in the proposal, as the educational programming goes hand in hand to improve safety and increase active transportation. Expanding roadways makes it less safe and decreases mobility for that 1/3 of our population that doesn't drive and relies on active transportation and transit. Let's build a future that takes care of our most vulnerable community members, faces the realities of climate change and structural oppression head on. Please choose scenario B. This is the way that we can help meet the safety, equity, and climate goals to which our state and communities have committed. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Megan, and then Sabrina, are there any others?
No, Chair, we've heard from everybody today after Megan.
Okay, thank you. Megan, you have the floor for 2 minutes. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Megan Ramey, and I'm the Active Transportation Representative for ODOT Region 1 Act, a board member for Columbia Area Transit, and I'm known as the crazy bike lady conducting Hood River's bike train and walking bus and Safe Routes to School program. My 12-year-old daughter has biked and walked to school since she was 3, and I, like all moms, hold my breath until she is home because I am scared she will be hit or killed by a car or large truck. Of the 4 scenarios presented by ODOT on the IIJ flexible funds, I strongly support scenario 2B, funding active transportation, safe routes to school, and the new program, Great Streets. Over the past 20 years, I have worked on mitigating climate change, reading the science, and becoming progressively more horrified by leaders who run on climate change, their disconnection between carbon emissions and single occupancy vehicles. This past summer's heat wave gave me an anxiety attack and affected my mental health. To replace the trips taken by cars and trucks, we need funding to provide safe infrastructure for e-bikes, cargo bikes, mobility devices, walking seniors, and kids who roll or walk to school. Not only will this reduce our carbon emissions, but it will reduce congestion, make us more resilient, happy, and healthy. I have a couple of examples of this. I organized the National Walk and Bike to School Day last October, where we had 200 kids and their parents who walked and biked to school. The congestion on the streets and around the school was noticeable, or the congestion reduction was noticeable. If we had safe crosswalks and separated bike lanes, most notably on Highway 281, these kids could bike to school by themselves every day, avoiding many trips taken by cars, much less their parents' time. The kids on my bike train say riding to and from school is the best part of their day. And just one more quick example that'll brighten your day. Lastly, I run the Hood River Stairs every Thursday. And this morning I met an 86-year-old man named BK who walks 4 sets of stairs a few times a week. That's 1,200 steps, plus the amount it takes to walk from his house. He walks everywhere in town and is one of the happiest people I have ever met. So keep BK in mind, choosing option 2 for active transportation. So our most vulnerable are seniors, accessibility challenge, and children have a healthier, happy future with clean air. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Megan. So that completes our oral testimony for today. Let's take it's 1:50. Let's take a 10-minute break and convene at 2. Before we go, do people have flexibility beyond 2:30? Could we go till 3 or not? You can go till 3? Melinda?
Can I split it with you?
Okay, we'll go to 2:45. And I'll see you guys at 2.
Okay.
Travis, how long is your slide presentation?
Mr. Chair, I think we have about 25 slides. We had allowed for a total of about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes in total presentation and discussion time.
Yeah.
So obviously you have a little bit of extra time beyond 2:30, but we can also, when we reach an appropriate point, we can stop and carry some of that over to March 10th as necessary.
Okay, I think what I'd like to ask you to do is keep it to, I know this is difficult, but keep it to 15 minutes. Just hit the high points. And then it will roll into a conversation, and maybe we can use the slideshow as a way to engage in questions people have, because I want to make sure the commission gets a chance to talk at their meeting. So I would suggest that.
Okay.
But I apologize for having to suggest that. And then my thought, just as we're gathering, is for the next meeting, I'd like to limit public comment to, if we have 2 hours, is that what we have? 2 hours or 2.5?
The next meeting, Mr. Chair, is a regular commission meeting, and we have set aside an hour for public comment at this point on all topics that would be on the agenda, and an hour to talk about the IIJA. We may choose to extend, in particular, the IIJA topic, depending on the conversation today.
Okay, so I'm thinking maybe we'll steal a little bit of that public comment time, maybe 15 minutes of it. And my rule would be, I think we want to hear orally only for those people who have not testified, and or their organization has not testified.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. That's in fact, that's the approach we took today as well, is that those who testified in January, we asked for other voices to come forward. We asked for one representative per organization. That wasn't always the case, as you could tell.
Yeah. So I think we is all very valuable. We have a lot of written testimony. I'd encourage written testimony. Certainly, we want to hear more oral testimony, but I think we have to set some parameters going forward. And then I don't anticipate having oral testimony on 2JA at the 30th meeting on the 30th, because I view that as a deliberation meeting. We're going to try and close the record on the 25th. So we have a few days to absorb everything that's come in, or that comes in, particularly things that come in late. So that'd be my approach. Okay, 15 minutes of presentation, and then we'll have the balance of the time, which we have until 2:45 today, to just get questions out, and any thoughts members of the commission have at this point, just start surfacing thinking to the extent you're ready to. Travis?
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. For the record, I'm Travis Brower, ODOT's Assistant Director for Revenue, Finance, Compliance. I'll be giving a brief introduction, then turning it over to Mr. Brown. Next slide, please. Of the 3 types of funding that are included in the IIJA, last month, you heard our proposal related to flexible highway program funds, and you heard a great deal of great public testimony today that extended our ongoing conversation with Oregonians about how to invest those dollars. Today, we're going to focus on the 2 other types of funding, specifically the competitive grant programs that are available from USDOT, and what we would call the dedicated funding programs that go to specific program areas, specifically bridges, the Protect Program for Resilience, the Carbon Reduction Program, and the Electric Vehicle Charging Program. All of these are new types of funding that the IIJA has provided. Next slide, please. As a reminder, here's the totality of the IIJA funds, formula funds that are coming to Oregon for public transportation and highway programs. I've highlighted those that we're going to be talking about today, those 4 program areas, and they account for about 37% of the total funding, just as the flexible funds accounted for about 32%. Next slide, please. There are a number of programs that we are not going to bring you today that are just programs that will follow the existing processes that are in place. These are programs that didn't exist or that already exist, and they just got a little bit of a plus up in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That includes our safety program known as ARTS, CMAC, the Transportation Alternatives Program, which we put into the Community Paths Program, the Surface Transportation Block Grant that we share with local governments, MPO planning, and public transportation. All of those essentially have program structures that are already in place, and the additional money will just go out through those program structures. So with that brief introduction, I will turn it over to Mr. Brown.
Good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, Cooper Brown, ODOT's Assistant Director for Operations. I'll be real brief here. I want to fly over the competitive grants. So as a reminder, in addition to all the formula funds that come through the bill, there are lots of grant opportunities, all told over $100 billion in competitive grants that are going to be coming online through this bill. To put that in perspective, historically, Oregon, we receive about 1.2% of federal grants. So feasibly, if you did the math and that precedence holds, we could be looking at a doubling of the funds that are coming to our state. So another 1.2 billion potentially through these competitive grant programs. On the slide here, you see a list of some of the grant programs, but not all of them that are coming through the bill. The other thing to take away here is that some of these programs are new to us and to everyone. And some of these are ones that we're more familiar with, like RAISE and IMPRA. And the ones that are new, we're watching very closely to understand the criteria and make sure that we're poised to compete for these funds. Next slide, please. So in terms of our competitive grant strategy, the things here to flag really are, we're putting together a game plan that identifies which projects we'll apply for each grant program of those ones that I listed there before and the other ones that are coming through the bill. We're doing that work right now, and we expect to have that in place next month. And we will be using that list to then get all of the projects that we're going to be competing for the individual grant programs, getting them up to a state of readiness to be competitive. So think about things like getting through the NEPA process, through planning and design, getting them ready to go and be competitive as we apply for these grants. That will require some funds to be put towards some of these projects to make sure they're at that state of readiness. And you'll recall that last IAJA conversation we had with you all, among those 9 set-asides, if you will, we are recommending that the commission put aside about $40 million of the federal funds coming from IIJA to help us shift some state funds aside to be able to provide the match for these grant opportunities, which will be in general about 20%. We're also looking at resources internally to ensure that we're ready and to be competitive for these grants and then to turn them around, obviously, as we get them. That includes grant writers as well as potentially economists to help us do the benefit cost analysis that is required for most of these grant programs. So that work is afoot as well. So that's just in a nutshell, very quickly, our grant strategy, what we're looking at and how we're poising ourselves to take advantage of these opportunities. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lind.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the Commission. For the record, Mac Lind, Interim Division Administrator for Delivery and Operations. So I'm going to hit quickly on an existing program that's getting plussed up in bridges, and then I'll also talk about our Protect program. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly. Certainly, the Commission is aware of our challenges, our aging bridge infrastructure, a slide you've seen before from me, but a great opportunity to leverage this additional $250 million coming to the state in the IIJ bridge allocation. It doesn't dramatically change our bridge conditions with this level of investment. You'll recall that we replace about 3 bridges per year, and that's about a 900-year bridge replacement cycle. We would need to be replacing about 27 bridges per year to feel comfortable with managing that long-term asset. Next slide, please. As we think about just our bridge conditions overall, this reflects the current state of ODOT's bridges, not local bridges, but ODOT's bridges. And you can see we've got an aging infrastructure, but we also have a demographic problem, a little bit of a baby boomer issue, if you will. While we've been reducing the number of poor bridges, our number of good bridges is also going down. That middle or the fair bridges are growing. And so we're starting to see the impacts of having to spend more of our resources on maintenance and repair to keep these bridges from falling into that poor category. So it's an ongoing challenge. It's one that takes quite a bit of time to start to see it play out, but we've been talking about this for several years of just the aging and declining infrastructure challenges that we have. In the bottom right, as we compare ourselves to the other Western states, how do we compare in terms of, we've got a much lower percentage of bridges in that good category. Well, we're doing fairly good in that poor category. That middle piece, as you can see, we're still falling behind even our neighboring states and how we're managing that overall asset. Next slide, please. So what are we planning to do with the IIJ additional funding? Here's the Fremont Bridge. Many of you are certainly familiar with that in the Portland area. One of the investments we're likely will make with this additional funding is to paint that steel bridge, especially the west end approaches to that structure. You can see in the right-hand picture some of the rust on the bottom of that steel bridge. And I know many of you are tracking, just like we are, the unfortunate bridge collapse in the Pittsburgh area earlier this year. That's a picture of the bridge failure in the middle there, a rusted beam. And that's what we're trying to avoid, of course, is prolonging the life of these structures. And the Fremont Bridge really isn't that old, built in 1973. So it's an example of what we would be using some of these funds to do to preserve our program, preserve our asset. Next slide, please.
Hey, Matt, quick question. Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
On the previous slide, you had all this comparison of West Coast cities or states, but it doesn't show which ones are which.
Well, Chair Van Brockman, Commissioner Simpson, that's an unfortunate cut on our part. We will get the updated version out to folks and posted with the states showing. Appreciate you flagging that. Okay, just want to mention what else would we be doing with this additional funding? I mentioned we replace 3 bridges a year. Historically, here's one that we certainly are identifying for replacement in the Portland metro area. It technically is on a local facility, one that we did a jurisdictional transfer on several years ago, but a very important bridge that we still are maintaining as part of that jurisdictional transfer until it's replaced, and an important freight connection to the port, as well as a critical route in addition to I-5. An example of just the deteriorating nature of the bridge, you can see the lower left, a timber piece of the bridge that's failing. So just an example of what we are able to accomplish. And of course, we wish we could do more with this funding, but we will be able to tackle a few issues with our bridges. Next slide, please. And then an area that we've been contemplating for a while is what do we do with, we've got a significant number of timber bridges across the state. And with the kind of total available funding, so the funding that Travis mentioned earlier, our formula funds, so what we already received to work on bridges, both through House Bill 2017 and federal dollars, and the additional influx of funding, we're likely to take on replacing some of these timber bridges. We spend an enormous amount of maintenance dollars on trying to keep these bridges up to operational level. Many of them are load rated. And as you've heard me say before, every bridge is important to someone. So being able to tackle a different approach and hopefully lessening the burden on our already stretched maintenance funding. Next slide, please. And then, of course, you heard a little bit of testimony earlier today about local bridge needs. There is a conversation going on with the cities and counties around how to split these funds, both in the required language in the bill, as well as just how we approach that in Oregon. And local bridges are much in the same place in terms of having declining state of their bridges, as well as some unique off-system bridge requirements and needs, like you can see in this picture, that are not on the federal aid system. Next slide, please. So I'm going to switch over to Protect. You've heard us talk a little bit about this, but a new funding area in the
infrastructure package, $94 million over 5 years. An exciting area in terms of a federal investment and how we deal with the effects of climate change and climate adaptation. So when we think about the investments we'll be making here, significant investments in culverts, landslides, and other areas where we see extreme weather impacts on our system. Next slide, please. I just want to acknowledge the work of our climate office. I think a great example of what's going on internally in terms of leadership of that office and how it's informing the work of the agency and as we work in kind of internal partnership. You've heard Suzanne Carlson talk about this previously, as well as Amanda Peets around our climate adaptation roadmap. So a requirement of the bill, having a resilience plan, and we're leveraging that work that'll be completed later this year to inform our longer term investments of this funding, which is an important aspect, as you all are aware. Next slide, please. Here's an example of some of the data that will be informing how we invest these funds. This is specifically focused on inland flooding, but a lot of other data-driven elements too. How do we prioritize the funding? But also, how do we maximize our investment with these funds? Next slide, please. And then we don't need very many reminders about the aging infrastructure needs, especially with culverts. On the right-hand side, you can see an example of a culvert that washed out earlier this year on the coast and had that facility closed down for several days. But what can we do to leverage some of these funds for areas that we know are already having challenges with that aging culvert infrastructure need? Next slide, please. Here's some examples of some of the culverts we already are aware that are having significant challenges, but the lack of funding to go replace those culverts is always a challenge for us. And leveraging this new Protect funding to help go get at some of those most critical culverts, given that in high or extreme weather environments, that's when we tend to see these types of culverts fail and far beyond our maintenance and operations fundings to go replace those. Next slide, please. At this point, I believe, last slide for me. You've heard Assistant Director Brown talk about our competitive grant programs. One of those is in this space as well as in culverts. And so we'll be leveraging some of this new funding to help us plan and prepare for those competitive grants, as well as pursue some more innovative solutions, especially on the coast. So just a good opportunity to leverage this funding for even greater opportunities. With that, I believe I'm ready to turn it over to Ms. Peets.
Thanks, Mac. For the record, Amanda Peets, Administrator for the Policy, Data, and Analysis Division at ODOT. So as Mac talked about some of the new funding programs to support climate adaptation, I'm going to start to share some that focus on climate mitigation. So the carbon reduction program is one of those. It brings in $82 million focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the funding will be split roughly in 2/3. So 1/3 goes to the 3 largest NPOs in the state. Those are the transportation management areas, and that includes Portland, Salem, and Eugene. The next third goes to local jurisdictions or smaller NPOs. For that pot of money, ODOT will be managing the program, kind of running an open solicitation process to get project ideas in, work with an advisory committee to select those projects to go forward. And then the final third of funding goes to statewide programs that ODOT can influence and invest in directly. All 3 of those will be guided by what's known as a carbon reduction strategy that is required in the IIJA. Thankfully, we basically have a plan that can act as that carbon reduction strategy in the statewide transportation strategy, which I think you all have seen this chart several times. It talks about the types of investments that we can make there and how we need to fill that gap to catch up to where we need to go. So that will be a big part of how we move forward. The second piece that wasn't really in the statewide strategy is looking at the embedded emissions. And so the emissions in how we construct our projects from the materials that we use or the fuels that we use in the equipment. So we've done some research analysis with that, partnering really well with Mac's division on kind of figuring out what that future looks like and reducing our carbon footprint. And that will be really important to getting ODOT to be a zero carbon agency overall, is really reducing our carbon footprint. So that will be part of the strategy as well. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we will have stand up an advisory group to help guide us through this processes, make sure that we're folding in the right information because that carbon reduction strategy is across all three of those allocations, the transportation management areas, the smaller MPOs, and our state agency spending as well.
Quick question.
Yes, please.
Can you explain how you're going to be forming the advisory committee? What does that going to look like?
Yeah, great question, Commissioner Smith. So we will have representatives from each of the metropolitan planning organizations participate, as well as city and county representatives. We'll work with our partners at Association of Oregon Counties, League of Oregon Cities to make sure that we get the right representatives on there and a pretty diverse set of folks, as well as some industry and advocacy groups represented as well, so that we have that balance and make sure that we're certainly focused in on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also understanding those practitioners that would have to implement those projects and make sure they're center to the conversation as well.
So I'm hoping you're going to be including some rural representatives, not just the large MPOs in urban areas. Just
correct.
Making the question.
Yep, absolutely. So the focus of the funds that are split in particular to the smaller MPOs, and it does say rural areas. So we will be making sure that the representation is very strong on the rural side.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to offer that since we've hit the 15 minutes that you targeted, Amanda has a great presentation on electric vehicles, but we can stop here and carry that over, or you could have us continue through the end. Really up to you.
So let me just stop and see if there are any members of the commission that want to ask anything at this point or make any comment.
I'd just like to hear the rest of the presentation. We heard a lot about electrification from the community today, and I just think it's important that we know what our path is already, and I think it'd be helpful for the public to hear it. That's my perspective.
Any other comments? I agree with that. For me, this is one of the most important things we'll be doing, and I'm a strong advocate for going big on electrification, EV charging around the state, because I think it's a change moment, and nationally and internationally, the auto manufacturers are going there in a hurry. So I think we need to be, we can't be behind the curve on that. Okay, unless there's objection, Amanda, why don't you talk about electrification?
Okay, and I'm really glad to present this because I'm very excited following on the remarks that you heard earlier from Merkley's office as well as Forth. And I think our recommendations align really well with some of the things that they're asking for. So I'm pretty excited to share that with you today. So as you know, the IIJA provides a significant source of dedicated funding, $52 million for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. That investment combined with what we are currently doing for our West Coast electric highways and what we have planned for our community charging grants, which is TOF funding, will help to make a dent in our need for public charging infrastructure. In addition, we have private investments being made by car manufacturers like Tesla and charging companies like Electrify America that pair with our investment to meet those charging needs. And utilities and others are also playing in this space, all of which we coordinate with, as well as agencies like the Public Utility Commission. These pieces form an interconnected puzzle of how multiple players and multiple funding sources help address our infrastructure needs. And I will talk a little bit later about how that gets us, how far that gets us overall to meeting the needs that we have. But infrastructure is only one part of enabling transportation electrification. There's also cost as a key factor. For example, the purchase price of electric vehicles can be a barrier to some people buying those, and DEQ's Clean Vehicle Rebate Program can help with that by providing cash rebate for Oregon drivers. So it's just another piece of the puzzle and how that fits together. The other big component that we looked at as we enable transportation electrification is awareness, which is multifaceted, from ensuring that people know that electric vehicles are viable in the state, to understanding and digesting that information and data to inform how we move forward and how we proceed. So for example, our DMV keeps track of the registered number of electric vehicles in the state, Department of Energy uses that in calculations and kind of breaks that down by demographics as part of their biennial energy report and reports on that publicly. And then the last major area that we have is equity, and that really is centered to everything we do in transportation electrification. It's shown here as a separate box, but it's not really. It's blended throughout all of the others in what we do, and the need, for example, to ensure that vehicles and chargers are available in underserved communities. And ODOT is a convener across state agencies on transportation electrification and really provides that leadership role. But there's many different pieces that fit within that. And our job is to help kind of see that bigger picture. But we do know that those things are connected and help us to get to that transportation electrification future overall. So as we look at then what do we need to put out there for public charging infrastructure, that's really one of our key roles beyond being that lead agency and convener, is putting that charging infrastructure in place. In Executive Order 2004 on climate, as you'll recall, you've seen several presentations on TINA. So that's really that needs study that looks at where should charging go in the state and what volume of charging do we need to meet our statewide goals. You've heard a few times about that, but what I really want to focus on is we are intentional when we say transportation electrification, because it's not just cars and trucks, which is light vehicles. It's also medium and heavy duty. So that's transit vehicles and freight trucks, and micromobility, which is electric scooters and electric bikes. And each of those things have unique differences as we look at what their needs are and how we would approach addressing those. For example, light duty electrification is the most ripe of all the electrification fruits. All right, maybe that's a weird analogy, but basically the technology's there, and so is the interest and so is the uptake. So as we talk about how we use the charging infrastructure funding that we will get, light duty is our top priority among all those. Within those investments, that TINA study I mentioned has helped to pinpoint some of our major gaps in funding. In particular, has helped to identify that we need to focus on developing a backbone system along key corridors across the state and support charging in areas where current demand is not really high, so that private companies aren't coming in. So we need those public investments. And those are areas like rural areas of the state, Commissioner Smith, right down your alley there, as well as BIPOC communities, so Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, and in multi-unit dwellings. So that's really an area where the public can step up, ODOT can step up and fill that space. As we look towards medium and heavy duty, the technology is getting there, but it's still pretty nascent. However, many manufacturers are making commitments, and DEQ's new Clean Trucks rule furthers requirements that will result in growth in the industry. And we're seeing more industry interest in building those out, that charging infrastructure ahead of time. As we think about what we build out, what we look like in the short term is really adding wiring for future stations, so that to our light duty sites. So that's kind of known as future proofing. So we're adding high capacity wiring in so that we can enable those medium and heavy duty chargers longer term. In addition, we see opportunities to look for pilot projects, kind of charging hubs along the way, and in areas like I-5, which is a major travel corridor. For micromobility, there's been rapid growth in e-bikes and e-scooters. And for those that are kind of in the public space, most of those are charge at home. However, we do want to make sure we're providing those opportunities for charging as well. So we'll look at being very opportunistic then in how we approach those investments and trying to add kind of those low wattage chargers to our existing kind of light duty vehicle sites to enable that. Probably more of our work on the electric micromobility is around policy frameworks and awareness and enabling, as opposed to the public charging infrastructure.
So Amanda, on those three categories, how does it look in terms of investment and ownership? I mean, I think there's a lot of misperception. We've got more money than we actually have, and that we can go invest it, which I'm very interested in investing a bunch in EV charging. But we want to leverage that money in the way you're suggesting. We want to prime the pump. We want other investors. This is a public-private partnership that involves utilities and others. so it's both with respect to the charging stations and it's with respect to the power to the stations, which comes from the utility. So what's in the end, if you have a pie chart in each of these areas, light duty, medium, heavy duty, micro mobility, what's our percentage? I mean, what's our investment? And I know this is probably not yet settled, but I'm just trying to get vision out, make some rough calls here. You know, what's our investment model here, and what part of the total pie are we? And how do we start to educate people that this is not ask ODOT to put $100 million over here and nobody else does anything, because that's not going to work anyway. I mean, we don't run the utilities.
Great. So great question, and I will answer that hopefully as I go through these slides, because I anticipated that would be a question that we'd want to ask. And it's something we're thinking about certainly too, is it's not all on ODOT's shoulders. Where can we be the best, have the best influence, given all the other partnerships and things that are out there?
And just where can we, you know, not only where can we make the most what's the smartest investment for us, but also there are all these areas that we really can't provide that piece of the equation. So how do we actually get the partnerships in place to do this? That to me is the big question, the big picture. How do we put the pieces together? And then what is our budget?
Sure. Okay, great. So as we think about the slide I just showed and priorities, a lot of these are focused on the light duty vehicles. And I will reiterate again to your question, Chair Van Brockland, that I think our priority is light duty vehicle infrastructure investments at this time. And so as we think about those priorities and then the funding sources that we have, we can start to see which funding sources start to hit those priorities in different modes, and then identify the gaps, I think is kind of what you're getting at now. So the current funding that we have for, say, the West Coast Electric Highways, for example, is really focused on key corridors in the state, has been focused on light duty charging. I will acknowledge that the chargers that we have currently are pretty slow. They're low wattage chargers, which I think you heard from Senator Merkley's office. Those will need to be upgraded over time. We're going through a current upgrade process right now to make sure that we have all the right charging ports there so that it's accessible to multiple vehicle types, which is another thing Senator Merkley's office hit in. And then we are being opportunistic about adding some of those micro-mobility charging ports in those locations as well, which is especially important as you look at an area like US 101 that has a lot of cycle tourism, and that charging for e-bikes is pretty important on that corridor. Then moving on to a new program that we're looking at setting up. And I think the benefit here is now that we have the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act funding, we can see where there's holes in what that funding can do and what we could use with more flexible dollars. And so we're planning to fill some of those holes by really focusing on underserved communities. So this is an area where we will put the majority of our money towards BIPOC, serving BIPOC communities, towards multi-unit dwelling charging, which is often addressing some of those low income locations, hit a few more of those rural sites, and even some of the workplace charging. You'll see across all the other investment types, workplace really isn't accessible for that funding source. For a lot of those, this is one of the few that it is. And then, so the discretionary grants, this is the $2.5 billion that is not guaranteed to ODOT, but that we are really well positioned to compete for. That one can also be used for some of the BIPOC communities, but primarily corridors. This is where of our strategies, we would look towards funding some medium and heavy duty. So I would say percentage-wise, 100%. Pretty much of our IIJA dedicated funding is going to go towards that light duty focus, even though we're going to have some mindfulness towards medium and heavy duty. This discretionary pot is where we can dip our toes a little bit more into the medium and heavy duty side and start to enable that for those kind of future growth that we're anticipating in that sector as well. And so as I mentioned with the dedicated funding, we are going to focus on the light duty side, future-proof for medium and heavy duty, have some opportunistic investments for micro-mobility. It is focused on corridors and corridors fully. So as I then transition, what are the corridors that we have in the state? Oregon is very well positioned. We have some of the most corridors of states out there. We have 7 identified. And so, as I mentioned earlier, one of our priorities from a public investment standpoint, as opposed to the private side, is that backbone system. So that's what you're seeing here. Is that absolutely complete? And what that backbone system should look like? No, it's a starting point of some of the key corridors that we've identified and had designated thus far. So there'll be another round of designations that we can look for opportunities to complete this out a little bit more. While $52 million sounds like a lot of money, we'll probably be able to build out on a couple corridors here, right? Or 3, 4, we haven't quite penciled out what that number looks like exactly, but it's not all 7 built out with just those funds. So the funding will be stretched pretty far. This map here, that dark line that's running down Interstate 5, that just shows that we have a hydrogen fuel corridor designated for Interstate 5. So everything else is electric vehicle corridors, including I-5, but we got an additional designation for hydrogen fuel cells, which may be promising technology for the medium and heavy duty sector. And then the light green shows where some of the West Coast electric highway sites are today. So this is some of the investments that you as a commission has made thus far in terms of kind of geographic distribution. In addition to that, these blue sites show then where we have some DC fast chargers in the state. So this is where we have some of the higher kind of capacity things in the state. In terms of what does a site look like? So this gets, again, why I'm excited when Senator Merkley's office testified this morning. Some of the things that were brought up are exactly what we're talking about here. And I will also share the other exciting piece is we've been playing on the national side. We have a lot of expertise and experience with our West Coast electric highways that we have directly informed that guidance that has come out recently. So what that guidance says is we need quad charging. So that's that kind of inset on the right side. And what quad charging is meaning that 4 vehicles can charge at one time at a site because you have separate and distinct stations there. It would be 3 150 watt and 1 350 watt chargers. Those are all considered DC fast chargers. So they have pretty quick turnaround, especially the 350 watt. In terms of plugging in, it's almost like an experience going to a gas station and refueling. It's pretty quick and fast. And then the light gray at the top of that inset is really showing that future-proofing idea that we will at least put the wiring heads in so that we can put those new stations on top in the future and develop those out. Hopefully, in many ways, Chairman Brockland, to your point, bring in the electrical grid capacity at those sites and locations too, which is really where I feel like we have a great opportunity to partner with our utilities and some of the investments that they have to make and really leverage these funds by them bringing in the wiring, us putting the heads and chargers in. Oh, and I do want to mention on that, the graphic too with the windy road. It says here every 75 miles. That was our recommendation. The federal guidance came out and said that they want charging sites every 50 miles. With our state, I think we'll have more closely spaced chargers in our urban areas. Getting it at every 50 miles in our very rural areas, maybe a little bit of a challenge and a stretch, but that's what that federal guidance requires at this time. So I think getting to that need, what are we actually doing to meet our things? In total, we need around 4,500 DC fast chargers over the next 5 years. This comes from the TINA study. And today we only have a few hundred. So that's that bar on the right. The need for level 2 chargers, which are lower kilowatts. So that's different than what was shown on the previous slide, right? These are much less lower kilowatt chargers. But the need for those is great. We need around 11,000 ports and we have about 2,000 today. So we're behind where we need to. So then as we look at the funding sources that I talked about earlier, what is that bias across all these investments? Where can we get in terms of meeting this needs? So our preliminary, this is pretty preliminary, back of the envelope calculations are that we can get around 4,000 level 2 chargers, meeting around 40% of the need for level 2. And then adding about 1,000 DC fast chargers, which is about 20% of the need. So our funding helps certainly. And this is just a 5-year need. This is not like the 20 or 30-year need. This is in the first 5 years, what our investments should look like. So it's certainly helping us along. Is it sufficient to where we need to be? No. But to the point earlier, as we look at these costs, there's a number of different players in this in terms of folks making investments. ODOT is one of those entities, but there's others like DEQ's Clean Fuels Program, which gives credits and rebates that then help put more chargers out there. Between that and utility investments, we anticipate about 50% of the charging need over the next 5 years can be met. So ODOT's investments plus utilities plus the Clean Fuels Program gets us around 50%. So then the question is, private sector, what do? Do they fund the rest? Probably not. They're probably not going to have the funding to go into those sites. So the fact is we will have a gap. The question is, how much will that gap be? Is it going to be a little or a lot? So that's kind of where we're at in that funding picture. So there is a gap that exists. We certainly help to contribute to get there, but more investment is needed from different players. So with that, I will pause.
I had a question, Amanda.
Yeah, please.
When you're looking at the full investment cost, are you just looking at the charger itself or and the units, or are you looking at also the infrastructure and improvements that go on around those charging stations?
Yeah, it's a little of both. So I would say our costs fully capture the infrastructure that we need to put in. So the wiring up to the hub that goes on there and the plugins and all that kind of stuff is included here in these cost estimates. It does also include general assumptions around that wiring capacity and other things coming in to come out with this total need, but doesn't, because we haven't done like a full, here's exactly where we're going to put this site and location, we can't come up with all the costs included in here. So these are pretty rough estimates that include most of the things that you mentioned.
Other questions? Or do you want to think about it for a while?
I actually had another one just as it relates to, because everybody's going to be very inclined to throwing, I mean, we hear it, it's getting used very heavily now. I think BIPOC really started coming online 2 years ago, but everybody uses it now. And personally, I think it's a great talking point, but the question is, how does it really actually justifiably benefit those groups? And so I asked that question because on this, we talked about investments and impacts to BIPOCs, and that's what the feds are going to use as jargon and content for people to submit grants and things of that nature. How do we measure that? Is it just a air quality impact benefit to the community? Because when we start talking funds and investments, my thing is going to be more about, well, how do those funds benefit those groups from an economic standpoint personally? But I don't know how others think of that. And so I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I'd love to chat more sometime about kind of across our climate and other efforts, how we center equity and try to make real measurable impacts. I think for this work in particular, when we talk about BIPOC communities and low-income communities, it's around the geographic location of the infrastructure itself. And so oftentimes in those communities, the current uptake or amount of electric vehicles that you see in those areas is small. It's a small percentage, right? Because the electric vehicles are more expensive. There may not be charging in some of those areas. So the private sector doesn't see that necessarily as an attractive place to come in because the demand doesn't currently exist. They're not sure how much money they'll make off the chargers once they're in place. So that's really where the public infrastructure can come in, is geographically to locate within communities, within multi-unit dwellings, close to apartments and different locations, so that we're making sure that the infrastructure there is there and accessible, in addition to partnering with our agencies like DEQ that's offering our incentives for vehicle purchases or even leasing to those pinpointed to some of those communities. So we're trying to pair that together because that's really where the public can play that the private sector wouldn't as much.
And with that, if that's the case, then to be transparent, I would highly suggest that the department not use that language in that context. Because really what you're saying is underserved communities, not BIPOC communities. Unless you're essentially stigmatizing BIPOC communities as just being underserved groups. But the reality is BIPOC doesn't really have an economic metric to it. It's a demographic in terms of like ethnic demographic. And so if we are going to utilize that language, we could be talking about in the context of who's installing these chargers, where are we buying the charger, charges from. I know there's businesses out there because we're already as a business looking into this. Not only the charging units themselves, but also, you know, who is it a ride share program for a multifamily dwelling that focuses on underserved groups of color that, you know, that they're using those vehicles? Is it who's building the infrastructure, who's pouring the asphalt, who's sourcing the materials? All those different things are what I think about, because I think about economics. I don't think about just the social benevolence, feel good stories. I think there should be real intentional focus on making sure there's real benefit to those groups if we're going to use that context or that content. Otherwise, we might as well just say underserved groups.
Yeah, and I apologize. In many ways, it's probably both, right? So that we have underserved communities that we're making sure has access to charging and affordable electric vehicles, in addition to the DBE opportunities and others we have with contracting and how we set things up, because that's certainly on the radar. It's in the federal guidance and something that we're looking at as well.
Okay, good. Can you send this whole slide deck to us right away? Just email it to us so we have it immediately to look at. I want to talk about one other thing, and this is not a decision, but it's a preliminary discussion, but and maybe Travis can help us through this, but when I look at the 400 million, well, first of all, maybe we should see this mock-up slide that I was referring to at the beginning of the meeting. So this is trying to get at both. Well, you tell us, Travis, describe this.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So this slide is designed to integrate the flexible highway program funds under the different scenarios, in this case, the fix-it scenario, with the dedicated funds that we just talked about and some of the other fund areas. So what I did here was took the the overall pie chart and really used the allocation under this particular fix-it scenario to put that together, really in a way that showed, in the green area, essentially the areas focused on equity, sustainable transportation, climate, racial justice, all of those areas where the focus would be on those core values and outcomes. And then integrating the fix-it funding into, to add it to the bridge and resilience. So you can see the portion of funding going there, the funding for enhanced highway, safety, local governments, and then the other category. So what this does is it gives you a sense of, under the fix-it scenario, what does the totality of funding look like? Our plan is that we can bring that to you in the March 10th meeting. Over the next month, essentially, or a little bit less, we'll be continuing to gather comments from the public. And our goal is to come to you on March 10th with the totality of that public input record and with the comments you receive that date, and then have a conversation with you about, asking essentially each of you to weigh in on which scenario you are most in favor of and what your favored funding allocation would look like, whether that's one of these scenarios that we put on the table or perhaps a modified version based on what you've heard from the public and based on your understanding of the need across the transportation system. We would recommend that we come out of that meeting with probably no more than 2 options that we would bring back for that March 30th meeting, that then you could select from those. I think that would probably be the cleanest and easiest for everyone to understand in order to have just a couple of options that are really on the table. And we can do a little bit more deep dive analysis and certainly present you, other graphics or information as you need in order to make that decision on the 30th.
So on this graph, I think if we got one of these for each of the scenarios, so that we could look at them in terms of, here's where the spending goes under each of the varying scenarios, compare those. I think we could get that by early March, ahead of the March 10th meeting, give us some time to look at those, compare them to one another. We could have the kind of conversation you're suggesting for the 10th, but I do think we need this ahead of that. And I think we should also post this for final comment on our webpage so people could see that. We've been asked by a couple of state legislators to provide it. So I'd like to move in that direction. What we have now are the pie charts, and they're posted for just the flexible funding, just the 412. I think we need to show the entire amount and kind of where it's going. Just this is a transparency thing for me. So that would be the way I'd like to proceed on the draft. So I have one other thing. This is where what I was getting to. We talk about the 412 million. I want to have a short conversation now about, do we have 412 million? Because it sounds to me like the ADA money is about the minimum we can provide and stay on course with respect to our legal obligation under the settlement. So Travis, can you lead us through that for a few minutes? Because if that's true, then we don't have 400 million. I mean, we do technically, but we've already got 100 million allocated. If this is what we need to stay compliant, I don't want to be coming in here in March and having people go, oh, I thought we could, I thought we could take that down to 25. So I spent the other 75 over here. So can you talk about the ADA money? And the match money seems to me, the 40 million seems to me to be kind of in the same category. So talk about those two.
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Chair. And I'll turn to Mac for a little bit of additional detail about the ADA funding. But yes, the $100 million is probably the absolute minimum that we could have in order to stay on track, and frankly may not be quite enough. And again, I'll let Mac talk to that as we're working through the rapidly escalating construction prices across the entirety of the board, but in particular in ADA, where we're looking to find some savings. I will tell you that there is some level of ambiguity about the total amount of funding that we will receive over the course of the IIJA, particularly the way the funding flows on an annual basis. And so we have built in a little bit of conservativeness, if that is a word, into our funding assumptions about how much we will actually get under the IIJA. So we assume that there might be a little bit of increment on an annual basis that could be used for some additional investments. Much as you've directed the annual redistribution of funds into priority areas, we hope that we have been conservative in a way that will allow us to take that money and could meet some of those additional needs. You'll note that there's nothing in this allocation for the next steps on tolling, for the interstate bridge, or for a number of other priority areas. And therefore, we'll have to think through how we would use some of that unanticipated additional increment of funding that we have not programmed due to that conservative assumption for those other priority areas.
So the active sentence in that was 100 million is the absolute minimum. So Mac, do you want to?
Yeah.
Do you concur with that?
Yeah, Chair Van Broecklyn, members of the commission, I do. And you'll recall we've talked about with the commission over several months, just the emerging nature of our ADA curb ramp needs in terms of cost. In fact, we were just talking about it at the CIAC meeting yesterday, just the cost of doing business in general are going up across the board. We know that, and we're acutely feeling it as we try to push out this many curb ramps to meet the first milestone later this year of that settlement agreement. So I think it is the base. And I think given rapidly rising costs, we're a little nervous around what it's going to look like to meet the next milestone in another 5 years for the ADA settlement agreement. We are working on how do we do business differently. So what are we doing to reduce the number of right-of-way files we need to deliver those curb ramps, alternative contracting mechanisms like design build, and other mechanisms to reduce our costs, and in my words, reduce the risk that maybe contractors are pricing this work at. So where do we bring together
contractors and the agency together a little closer to reduce some of that risk. But given workforce challenges and some of the other things that we're seeing in the market, I would agree. It's the base as much as we know today around those costs over the next few years.
So any questions from the commission on that? So the other one I wanted you to talk about for a minute, Travis, was the match. Is that similarly kind of, you wouldn't want to have less than 40 million to potentially leverage several hundred million more on the grant side? Yeah, that would not be a place I'd want to short shrift and say, oh, we don't have enough money to match all these grant applications. We have a pretty good chance of getting more federal money. At a 20% match, when 8% federally funded projects are few and far between. So I would want to max out on our grant opportunity, because that's our biggest problem. This whole conversation is we don't have enough money. That's our biggest problem.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would agree with that, in fact, that is sort of a minimum amount, and we have no idea how long that'll last us. What I would anticipate is as we start drawing down that match pot over the course of the IIJA, if and when we need more, we would come back to the commission and say, let's take $20 million more out of existing programs, reprogram that to the 2730 STIP. So we wouldn't necessarily cut projects, but we push them out a year, and then we would have more money available to go leverage those federal grants. So absolutely, that would be a minimum. And my sense is there's a good chance we'll be back in front of you asking for a little bit more authority there. Or certainly, may get some additional authority from the legislature as well over the course of this funding package.
So I also think that we should have the same discussion about maintenance and operation. So, but if we just stop here with those two, just ADA and matching the grants, we're not at 412, we're at 272. So I just want to get the commissioners thinking about what do we the question that I think about is, what do we absolutely have to do? Must. And it seems to me like those two things would fall in that category. One, because we have a legal obligation on the settlement. And the second would be we have an opportunity with the grant funding. And then maybe maintenance and operation would be another 40. So if that's included, now you're down at 232. So I don't think we have 400 in my own mind. I'm just talking about my own personal conclusions. I'm quickly thinking we're talking about real discretionary funding that's lower than that, lower than 412, like in the 200 to 250 range. Or not 200, but 230 to 270 range, depending on what you do with the maintenance and operations piece, which would be another 40 down from 272, which would have you at 232. So is that a good way to think about it, or is that a terrible way to think about
it? Certainly, Mr. Chair, I think that is a good way to think about it, that those, of course, you could say, well, we're just not going to go for any federal grants and we're going to be constrained. That's probably not a very wise approach. So I would absolutely agree that at least the ADA is absolutely required by law. The operations and maintenance funding is probably the minimum we can do. In fact, as we've calculated, that will still, at that level of 40 million, we will likely see our O&M shortfall grow because of the IIJA due to additional matching funds, additional staffing costs to deliver these projects, and other factors as well. So frankly, we will probably be back to you as well with a plan for how we can use some of these existing funds to further reduce our O&M shortfall through a variety of things that we could do under the IIJA or even in the upcoming 2730 STIP. Because we know that's going to be another opportunity to continue trying to bite down on that unfunded O&M shortfall.
So if you think about the
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, just let me add one sentence and then I'll turn to Commissioner Smith. So you add the 100, the 40 for the maintenance and operation, the 40 for grant matching, you're at 180 of the 412. Sharon?
Thank you. I just have kind of a process question, and maybe it's more of a semantics comment than anything. So first, time check, we're at 3 o'clock, and I thought Orlando had to.
Orlando sent me a note and said he could stay till
Okay.
3.
So process-wise, we heard a lot of public testimony today and last time. We haven't had really a chance for the commission to talk any of this through.
Right.
The next step is we're having one more meeting where we're going to take additional public comment and then start deliberations. And then I thought I heard we're going to have the March 30th meeting, no public comment and a decision, and maybe between the next meeting and the final meeting, narrow it down. So I'm a little uncomfortable with process, and here are my thoughts. So today, what I'm hearing you say is, well, we've got this discretionary pot of money, but we've also have some categories that we maybe there's a consensus where we would say, even though it's in the discretionary pot, we as an organization have obligations that we have to meet. So we're going to choose to narrow the pot and fund certain things. And that's where I hear you going. But semantically, I think it's still in the overall, it's in the discretionary pot. We're
Correct.
choosing to say we must fund these.
Yes.
I'm not ready today, unless other people are and I can be brought along, to do those set asides.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying
Okay.
that. What I'm
Because we
saying,
haven't really even had a chance to talk
No.
generally about what we're thinking about all these. So just
Yeah.
a process clarification.
yeah, no, I appreciate the question and I agree. I mean, I don't want to make a decision today. I'm just telling you about where my thinking's going. And your thinking may go elsewhere. I mean, we may go different ways on it. You may say, we'll just take the risk on the settlement. I don't think that would be wise, but you could. I just want to get it out there. I was expecting us to have an hour plus to be talking, and we didn't have it, which is why I want, as I was saying when we came back from the break, which is why I want no more than 45 minutes on the 10th. I want it to be 2 minutes of oral testimony, no more than 45 minutes. And I want it to be from people who haven't spoken before, or organizations that haven't spoken before. Because it's not fair to have people who have never been heard not be able to speak. So we can hear from other people who have spoken once or more than once. But my biggest thing for the 10th and frankly for the 30th is we have to have enough time to really talk. It can't be 30 minutes. I mean, for just us to talk, I would allocate 2 hours. And that may not be enough because there's a lot here to unpack and think about. And I think and this is also no decision points today, but another thing I think about is we're really in very broad, high-level terms trying to do two things. We're trying to maintain an existing system and invent a new system simultaneously. That's really what's going on here. We're trying to take care of all our obligations for the system that exists to the maximum extent we can. And we're trying to create new systems in anticipation of the transformation that's occurring in transportation in the country and in the world, or will. And that these funds have got to serve all kinds of interests in both areas. And so it makes it very difficult. So I think we need a lot of time for conversation and to learn from one another. So I would like to see us get that time in the upcoming meetings. And I frankly think it's more important, I'm sure people won't like what I'm about to say, that it's more important at this stage that we have time to actually thoughtfully consider what we've heard in writing and orally, and we've been thinking about based on all the reading and thinking we've been doing on it, to try and get it as right as possible, because we know the job is very difficult. So I think we have a pretty good idea about what are all of the various areas of interest are. We may not know every single project, but we know at least areas of concern. So I just think we need sufficient time on the 10th and on the 30th to do that work. And I think it preempts anything else that we have to do on the 10th in the regular meeting. The 30th will just be this. But the 10th, I mean, if we have to move something out to May or April, let's move it out because we need sufficient time. Is that consistent with what you're thinking, Sharon?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear about our process. I see we even have a question in the chat, the Q&A from a public member saying, so when is the last time for public comment? And I just want to be clear because I think we need to hear public comment fairly. We need to give the public an opportunity to respond to our dialogue that we have at the next meeting.
Yeah.
But not wait so late so that we don't have a chance to digest it. So
here's what I was saying at the top of the meeting. The way I think about this is the written comment record would be open to March 25th. That would allow us then 5 days between the 26th and the 30th, well, actually 26, 27, 28, 29, 4 days to look at all the written material, review our notes on all the oral testimony. So written comment would be due by the 25th of March. Last opportunity for oral comment would be on the 10th, but we're going to have to, I think, unless, I don't know what else we have on the agenda for March 10th, but I was thinking 45 minutes for additional oral testimony, just new testimony. I mean, people who have not testified before. And then we could take the rest of it in writing by the 25th.
Mr. Chair, I'd recommend that is essentially the plan, but I would recommend one minor amendment to that. What we have stated to date is that we would like the public comments in writing on the current scenarios that are on the table by March 8th. That will allow you to get all of those comments in, receive those, read those, have the conversation or listen to public comment verbally on the 10th, and then have the dialogue among the commission. It would be very reasonable to leave the public comment open through March 25th for essentially public responses to the commission's dialogue on the 10th. As I think we want to make sure that at least you have a complete record of the public comment for your meeting on the 10th, so you can have the excellent dialogue and certainly the time. We are planning only a very brief presentation, essentially reminding you of what you've heard to date and what the scenarios are, presenting that information, and then really want to allow for you to have the time you need to deliberate and have a conversation, provide us direction.
Well, I'm fine with that. I don't know whether anyone else is, but I would be fine with the 8th for comment prior to the meeting. Then we'll have our conversation. There'll be opportunity up until the 25th to respond to our conversation on the 10th. I do think we need that last piece because our conversation on the 10th may provoke people wanting to kind of inform us about things that come out of our own discussion that they feel are either misunderstood or wrong or whatever they think. So I'm okay with it as long as we keep the written record open until the 25th. Then we could have I guess two written comment deadlines: 10th for the discussion, or 8th for the discussion on the 10th, and then I mean, I want to call it rebuttal testimony, but just response to the conversation on the 10th. That seems like a good approach.
Yeah, I like that. The only message I would like to say to the community is comment sooner rather than later, because we want to read it, but even if you get it to us on the 25th, we only have a few days, and it's going to be a lot more meaningful if we get it in early and we have a time to really read and consider it fully. So that's my plea to the public.
I agree with that. And I'm not trying to, the 45 minutes on the 10th is not to squelch more oral testimony, but at some point, as Commissioner Smith said, and I agree completely, is we have to shift from listening to discussion in order to get to a decision. And this money, if it's not allocated and out there by the end of this federal fiscal year, which is September 30, it gets reallocated to other states. So that's something we're not going to do. The amount we were getting, we're not going to have that at risk of being reallocated out of Oregon. So I think that's a good schedule. But I would love to see, as soon as possible, a draft agenda for the 10th, so that I can see what else is on it. Because if there's anything else that's crucial that like we have to make a decision on, I want to know what those are, and then everything else is subject to getting bumped. So let's make sure we know, and that we have a meeting on the 10th that's long enough to allow us to do what we have to do. Other comments from others on the commission about that approach?
Chair, one thing I'd like to ask staff is if they receive any comments before the 8th, like if we can get what they have on hand sent to us on the 4th, so we have the weekend to look at it. Yeah. I would really appreciate it, because I do have another job, and I need that weekend to be able to process through all of the papers. Thank you.
I agree with that completely. Let's get a couple of rounds, maybe the 4th, and then anything not captured by the 4th, we would get as a second round by the 8th. Make the 8th the deadline for comment prior to our initial deliberation. Then we'll have a final deliberation and decision on the 30th. And the reason for that is to ensure that we can fit in the rest of the process and get the money obligated, so we don't lose the money. So we have to stay on a calendar on this, or we'll get behind. Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone staying longer. I thought the comments today are really interesting. I learned a lot of things, and it really, I started thinking, Hood River, I started thinking about all these places like I was there, when people start talking about the Hood River Bridge, like, oh yeah, I can see, I've been across that bridge many times. Is that your route to Canada, Sharon? Or do you go 97?
97 all the way.
97 all the way up, yeah. Okay, any other comments?
Director might have a comment.
Is there a comment?
I actually was just coming on to answer any questions. So my only comment is a lot of work ahead of you, a lot of deliberation, and I would concur, Mr. Chair, and the rest of the commission. A lot of great comments that really show just the amount of energy behind this investment.
That is for sure. Okay. Anything else from the commission before we adjourn? Thank you for staying another 42 minutes beyond what we were supposed to be, but I think it was worth it, and the process discussion was really important. Okay, have a good weekend, and we will see you on the 10th.
See you later.